We're going to go ahead and get started. The minutes of the last meeting have been distributed. Are there any, there's 3 sets here. We have pass-arounds. So we have April 2019, we have May 6, and we have May 14. Any amendments to the minutes?
Second.
Can we take the minutes by consent?
Consent.
All right. Proposed agenda has been distributed to the members. Are there any amendments to the agenda? All right, the agenda is placed on the table for discussion. Are there any first item I have is Department of Revenue. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is Department of Revenue.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ed Vance. I'm CFO for the Department of Revenue, and I'm joined with Kevin Gully, who is our CIO and project manager for the ITS modernization project, which we refer to Project Next Door. Kevin and I would like to thank you for this opportunity to present our request for funding for our fiscal year 2020 appropriation of $20.3 million, which will go towards the implementation and funding of Rollout 2 of our multi-year, multi-phase project. Rollout 2 is anchored by the major tax type of sales and withholding. Currently, we are in the midst of implementing Rollout 1, which entails aeronautics, as well as corporate taxes. We are on schedule. It is going well, and we're looking forward to a Labor Day launch of those tax types, so we're excited about that. From a budget perspective, to date, we have been appropriated and funded $33 million. We have spent $21 million of that. $15.2 million has gone directly to our implementation partner, FAST. And of that $15.2 million, that has gone for the licensing of the software, which benefits the entire project, as well as implementation services for Rollout 1. And so, again, things are going extremely well. It's corporate and aeronautic taxes for Rollout 1, and again, we're expecting a launch date of Labor Day, so we're getting very close. From this point forward, looking towards Labor Day, we expect to spend an additional $6 million for this Rollout 1. $5.2 million of that will also go to our implementation partner, FAST. And that leaves essentially $6 million of the original $33 million that we've been funded and appropriated. And that $6 million represents a reserve that we've intentionally managed to, as you might imagine, a project of this scale and complexity. We started with the initial rollout of corporate taxes so that we could sort of get our arms around the project. And now we're looking towards the next 2 rollouts that will likely be a little bit more complex. So we thought it was prudent to have some level of reserve available for those rollouts. So Rollout 2, again, will be sales and withholding. Rollout 3 will be individual taxes. And so we feel like we're very well prepared for any contingencies that might arise with respect to those rollouts. From an overall project standpoint, very pleased to report that we are absolutely on schedule and on budget with this project, again, with a healthy reserve, as I mentioned, for any contingencies that might arise. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin, who is our project manager, and he'll give you a more in-depth overview of the project status, plus a little history, just to catch things up.
I appreciate the opportunity. Just to give you a little background, our project started September 2018. Our partner is FAST Enterprises. Their solution is called GenTax. FAST is in 26 plus states, and they've always delivered on time and on budget, like we are on time and on budget as well. Coupled with that, we are branding our solution. You'll hear these words: ITS, Indiana Tax System. That will be our tax administration system that will supplant our returns processing system called RPS. We also are branding an e-services portal called InTime, which will provide all kinds of functionality out to our customers and practitioners, et cetera. It is a 47-month program, 4 rollouts. Rollout 1 is the corporate taxes, which include our C Corp, Sub S Corp, partnership, aircraft dealer and excise tax, utility receipts tax, and then also FIT taxes. Labor Day of 2019, we're on target. It's 70 days away. Rollout 2 are our trust taxes, which include sales, withholding, but also food and beverage, county innkeeper's tax, motor vehicle rental, et cetera. That'll be Labor Day of 2020. Remember Labor Day. Rollout 3 will be our individual taxes. We're going to focus on that. That's Labor Day of 2021, though we do have sprinkled in some gambling taxes, charity, and type 2 gaming. Rollout 4 will be our special taxes: cigarette, OTP, other tobacco products, alcohol, et cetera. 47 months. As it relates to Rollout 1, once again, we're on time and on budget. We're 70 days away. We're really focused on 3 areas: testing, training, and cutover-related activities. And all of those are on track and on budget as well. Any questions?
Questions? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick question. This may be related, but since you're going to be interacting more with the public, which I think is great, as opposed to them mailing things in, other municipalities, Baltimore is the most infamous right now, have had issues with malware, ransomware. Obviously, that should be a concern for yours. I mean, I'm sure it's not going to be an issue, but what sort of steps have been taken to ensure that that won't be an issue?
Yeah, as it relates to security, the first step we did even before Rollout 1, they had to pass our security checks before we ever gave them the $7 million software license fee, and they did. These are Pub 1075, et cetera, security checks. As it relates externally to InTime, which is really our public-facing portal, think about it like a bank or a financial institution website. They will have 2-factor authentication and all the security around that, including the registration that's required.
Questions? Representative Brown.
Thank you. How do you deal with new companies, a company starting, business now and coming on board and registering?
Well, they'll still go through the NBIS process to register, but they will be integrating into the InTime solution and to our new ITS system just like they do today. So there's really not a new process there, at least through Rollout 1.
Any other questions? Representative.
Yes.
Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question. You reiterated on several times that you guys are on budget and on time, and this company does a good job. So what if you have a quip in there, a hiccup, or is there a penalty in regards to them getting this done by Labor Day Phase 1 or rollout number 1?
Do you know the contract?
If they get the work done, if the rollout's supposed to happen on Labor Day, if it doesn't happen, are there any penalties?
We'd have to research that to see. I'm not sure if there's a penalty. I do not believe that there is, but we'll get back with you with a definite answer on that. But what we, again, from our side, we're certainly trying to be prudent with the budget in terms of establishing a reserve that'll help us to manage through any potential unplanned events. But so far, the project is absolutely moving according to plan.
Mr. Vance, but you said on our side, and I understand our side.
Yeah.
I'm talking about their side.
Right.
And I'm just asking that question because so many times we have a date and we do not reach that date, and we just kind of muddle along until it's completed. So that's my question. And even the reserves, are those reserves for if we have to muddle along? Or is that responsibility? If they say they're going to do something for X millions of dollars, is there a change order in there or what? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah. There certainly is a change order process in the contract that both sides have agreed to. But again, I'll have to get back with you as to whether there's any absolute penalties associated with any shortfall on their side in terms of not meeting that Labor Day deadline.
Yeah, let me add to that, there are protections in the contract. Specifically, that's what we'll get back to you on. So.
Any other questions? Thank you. Next, we have the auditor.
Good morning. Chair, committee members, thanks for allowing me the opportunity to explain a system that affects every single person in the room. As you can read from the small paragraph, which is a summary we provided for you, our current payroll system is over 30 years old. And we were notified 5 years ago, or actually only 2016, that it would no longer be supported in 2023. And at that time, the current administration came before the committee as an FYI, and now I'm coming back to just give you an update of where we are in that process and explain why we received the appropriation in the budget bill. When our software is no longer supported, it means that we will no longer receive annual software updates, tax updates. If there's a failure in the system, then we will not get support for that. And so you can imagine how that could negatively impact our ability to pay 30,000 employees. So after a year of research on what payroll system we might want to go to, we ended up determining that the one we already own and that we've owned for several years, just not implemented, is the best solution for Indiana. And it's part of our PeopleSoft system. So we want to integrate with the system the state already uses for time and labor, benefits, and compensation. And by doing this, we will save money. But when we do this, we also have to upgrade the PeopleSoft Human Capital Management, which is the umbrella that the payroll module fits underneath. Although it's really challenging to implement new software and a little risky, my team and I are excited, believe it or not, that we are going to gain a lot of new capabilities that will positively impact the state. Speaking of security, like Liz Brown mentioned, for the first time, we're going to be able to switch to using a PeopleSoft ID number instead of everybody's social security number that our current software, which I didn't mention, is a DOS-based software that works on mainframes. So we're going to switch over and use PeopleSoft IDs. A couple other efficiencies include elimination of paper-driven processes. Right now, if you want to change your bank statement, you have to fill out a form, you transfer that to your HR department in your agency, they transmit it to the state personnel department, and then they transmit it to the state payroll, which is me. And so that's 3 different paper trails, and it takes a lot of time. With the new system, it's going to have employee self-service, so employees will be able to log in with their credentials and make the changes that they need electronically. And surrounding that also is the security issue that Liz Brown mentioned. I think that it's very important that we have all the controls in place when we have people ability to come in and log in and have access to personal identifiable information. It will also improve the electronic approval workflow. So right now there are several manual data entry points, and this will replace those and allow for a faster audit and a faster turnaround on payroll processing. And last but not least, I think our state agencies will be most happy. And right now, every 2 weeks when we process a payroll, we hit the general ledger with 1 transaction, and then the state agencies have to go and manually allocate that amongst all the projects and federal funds in their agency. With the new system, that calculation will be allocated automatically when we transfer that every 2 weeks. And that calculation can take several days for some agencies, depending on how many projects they have. We've been coordinating with the state budget agency, state personnel department, and IoT. We recently issued a request for proposals, and those are due back in August. With this appropriation, our plan is to make the award in December and start implementation in 2020. And with that, I will entertain any questions.
Any questions? Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this change save us money?
I believe it will save us a lot of money because if we don't switch and then our payroll system isn't reported, one, we will not have the ability to properly pay people, but two, we'll have to go back to a lot of even more manual entry. And so just the fact that we're going to be able to continue to pay payroll is the most important reason we're doing this. But secondly, we are going to save a lot of time at agencies. Depending on how big your agency is, will depend on how much time you save manually entering the payroll data.
Okay. So you didn't talk about this for employees, the 30,000 employees. I'm assuming you're going to have some type of cybersecurity program that you're going to implement with that, so people's information doesn't get out there. And maybe you just left it out because we want to make sure that is part of the program as well.
Yes, sir. In fact, it's a major reason we are excited. My office is excited to implement this because our current payroll system uses social security numbers as their ID. Right. And when we're trading information all the time, it's out there. And so the new system, we are going to use a PeopleSoft unique identification number. So it's not a social security number. So right away, we're going to limit access and the ability to get to that, but it doesn't mean that we don't house that information. And so we still have to take cybersecurity very seriously. And we work closely with IoT, and we have our own IT department within the auditor's office checking on that.
Great. And the PeopleSoft program that you're using that tracks the projects that the different state entities have, is it similar to what IDOA has right now? Are you familiar with the PeopleSoft pay system that they have?
So the auditor's office uses PeopleSoft for our financial system as well, and I didn't talk about that today. We are currently in the process, lucky us, we are also upgrading our PeopleSoft financial to 9.2. It hasn't been upgraded in several years. We just happen to be doing these at the same time. And it is not the exact same as IDOA, but they are communicating and we are working with them.
Okay, so along those lines, your MWBE and VBE participation will be easily tracked. We don't have to wait 6 months for people to compile information and things like that when we request the information, correct?
Correct. We are using the IDOA standards that the state has set up. We are following all of that because we want to make sure that we are engaging all people when we go to get this project so that we can use the taxpayers' money as wise as.
Right, and then just finally, in your RFP process for this $20 million, you did request minority women, veteran-owned business.
And we've also given them a higher rating scale if they employ them, or if they bid, they get extra points to raise their score above.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Cindy Hoy, Indiana State Fair.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and talking about the Indiana State Fairgrounds and the enhancements. We are here. I'm the executive director, Cindy Hoy, and Vice President of Development, Ray Allison, is here. And we are asking today for architect and engineering dollars for the Swine Barn Fall Creek Pavilion project. If we start from the history, it was built in the early 20s, almost 100 years old when they built these old structures out at the fairgrounds. They built them with the nod and the understanding that livestock came on trains. Today, livestock comes in 35-foot trailers with a dually attached to it, and they're not as safe to maneuver as maybe they were back in the day. So the swine barn itself is failing, the steel is failing, the concrete is spalling and eroding. It was an open air structure, the last on the fairground. So what we are looking to do is to renovate the structure, keeping the historic facade, and giving it a nod to a much safer biosecurity structure for livestock, as well as a multi-purpose revenue generating facility. And so today, we're asking for this money for schematic design, design development, and then also construction documents. We're working with a company called Schmidt and Associates for our A&E, but we are also looking for a CMC project and looking for construction managers at this point right now. We will eventually get to a no less than 20% WBE, MBE veteran supported with this project, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is just for architectural and engineering. Do you have a ballpark on what you think construction will cost? Is that going to be about 25 million plus, or what are we talking about?
So it is about a $50 million project. It is not only the Fall Creek Pavilion, but it also will impact the public safety structure right next to it. So it's a project that has many arms and legs to it.
And then this revenue projection, you're going to use this as a multi-use facility for a variety of events. Do you have an idea of what you're looking at there? I mean, I assume you're going to be competing with the private sector as well.
So there are currently a number of our current show producers that have asked for additional space. For example, the Mecum Car Auction, the Boat Sport and Travel Show. So there are a number of current promoters that want more facilities, and this structure will be connected to other buildings, so it is it will work as an additional space for those show promoters. In addition to that, we've been really aggressive taking a look at the sports industry in Indianapolis and what is lacking, and we have got some really good initial feedback on what we might be able to do in the sports line. Ray, you want to take that from there?
Sure. We have been looking at a number of things in that area, but we're building the building with basketball in mind, with volleyball in mind, cheerleading, gymnastics. And right now we're looking at the possibility of indoor soccer in the building. That's one of the number one things that came to the surface was a lack of indoor soccer space in this market. So we're taking a hard look at that right now as well. But as Cindy said, this will be used like all of our other buildings on the grounds that operate as a cattle barn during the fair and the West Pavilion year round. We have a lot of existing show producers that will move into the building and a sales team that is eagerly awaiting this building to come online to pitch it to additional building users.
So some of the new sporting events that you would like to host, though, are being hosted elsewhere. So I'm just wondering, did you participate in some sort of study? You know, through the session, we had a very interesting discussion about expanding, well, it's that way, the convention center for expanded space as well. So how do we do this without cannibalizing and/or hurting the private sector that is already doing this?
Sure. We completed a sports feasibility study last fall related to this building and looked at what was lacking in the marketplace. And the things I mentioned are things that are not being utilized to their fullest in this market, particularly indoor soccer. We've also had some interesting conversations about indoor track and field. There are no real facilities in this market that can accommodate national level events for USA Track and Field or the NCAA. We've also had conversations with the NCAA about this facility and our other facilities being prime for not Division I, but lower level national championships that currently are not in this marketplace. So yes, to answer your question more directly, we are aware of the competition. We are not looking to cannibalize. We're looking to grow participation in this market in a number of event categories.
And then if that were the case with the NCAA, would they presumably sign a long-term contract?
And again, they go through an RFP process, and some of them are multi-year deals, some of them are one-offs. They try to move them around the country. We're very early in our conversations with them of what that would look like. In fact, we just met with them, I think, 3 weeks ago. So yet to be determined, but our hope would be that if they bring some of those events here, they would be multiple year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Porter?
Chairman, thank you, Cindy, and Ray being here. In regards to the Division II and III potentially coming to Indianapolis, are you in conversation with the Indiana Sports Corporation and NC2A in regards to that?
Yes, as I said, we just met with the NCAA a couple of weeks ago to start having those conversations with them. And our conversations with USA Track and Field were brought to us via the Indiana Sports Corp. So we're talking with those folks regularly about how this new building can add to what we already do at the fairgrounds.
Okay, thank you very much.
Senator Taylor?
Yes, I want to talk about the swine barn in particular, because people get connotation when you say swine barn that it's a barn for swine. Just so we know, can you name some of the activities that, under the current design, that this facility can house?
So from a 1923 structure, the only thing it can house is, it's our maintenance shop and it's also storage. It is not a revenue producer at all because it's not enclosed.
So in other words, you're changing the facility from a non-revenue producing to a revenue producing facility, at the same time keeping the intended purpose of the swine to be there during the state fair.
Yes, sir.
Now, there's some of us who've been to the swine barn. How quickly can you change that over and be ready for whatever comes next? I think this is important, an important discussion.
Thank you for that question. Under the preliminary thought of this, and we have to, when we get the CMC secured, we'll be able to definitively answer that question. But currently, the plan is that it would start demolition after the 2020 fair, which gives us a year to plan it, to design it, to develop it, maybe even do some pre-securing of steel, things like that, so that the idea is that we could build it in a year, at least have occupancy within that year for the show pigs.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Last, the financing of this is through state appropriations to pay the debt service on a bond issue, and that part of that. Is the state fair putting in any money into this deal? I mean, as far as the revenue generated from the bill.
So no, this goes through IFA and the Department of Administration.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Representative Porter?
Thank you. One quick more question. Thank you again, Cindy and Ray. In regards to Schmidt and Associates, are they self-performing any of the A&E or what? I know you mentioned minimum 20%. Are they performing the A&E? And if they're not, if they are they mentoring any other minority companies, women-owned companies, minority-owned companies in regards to this initiative?
Yeah, we're still working through all of that right now. Schmidt and Associates will do the majority of the A&E work themselves, but they will have some subs, engineers, and survey companies that will be brought to the table, and we will encourage them to seek out XBE participation in that. Once a CM is on board, the CM statute allows contractors to do 20% of the construction work. So some of that will be done in-house by the construction companies themselves, but at least 80% will be outsourced, and we will seek 20% participation on that end. But I will say we're down to 3 finalists right now for the project, and all of them brought MBE companies in as partners in this project from the very beginning that will, and most of them have said that some of this self-performed work will be done by those MBE firms.
Are you in consultation with the Indiana Department of Administration on that, or the Minority Women Division of that? Where I think Senator Taylor sits on that commission, I do believe.
We have been working with DOA. Brian Renner from DOA has been involved in this process from the beginning through the development of the RFP. He reviewed the RFP responses and then sat in on the finalist presentations. So we are very actively involved, and they're helping us navigate this project.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll continue to have offline conversations in regard to real minority participation. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Next up is Matt Kent, Department of Administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. Just got a brief project here for IDOA. It's actually just a release of funds. This is the annual release of R&R payments from IDOA to IFA managed facilities. These facilities were all originally bonded through IFA. A portion of the original bond payment was to fund capital R&R for the long term. And now that those bonds have been defeased, we continue making those capital R&R payments over to IFA for the long-term capital needs of these buildings. The buildings listed on the agenda are as follows: Government Center North and South, Government Center parking garages, forensic lab, State Museum, Rockville Correctional Facility, and Pendleton Juvenile Correctional Facility, and those are all general fund. Any questions on the release of those funds?
Any questions? Senator Tine?
Thank you. Just a question. Why aren't the two prison facilities under DOC?
These were originally, so they're originally bonded, so DFC still has involvement with those facilities. This is just a release of funds, basically for the management of the capital long-term. It basically manages the capital projects of those facilities. So DOC is still heavily involved with those facilities. This is just for the capital planning and capital funding for those projects.
Okay.
Any other questions? Senator Taylor?
You may not be able to answer this question, but I'm really concerned about the lighting in the Washington Street, in the Government Center North and South project. Are you doing anything to the parking garages?
Of which parking garage?
I guess it would be the south one, right across the street from Victory Field.
I'm not sure. I can look into it and get back to you. Those.
Yeah, and if they could talk about the lighting inside of there in the evenings, it's very dim.
Okay.
And I just want to, I don't know if it's part of the Government Center South project or not, but something I'm concerned about.
Yep. I'll take a look at it and get back
Thank
to you.
you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Jackson?
I'm going to try to attempt to maybe clarify and respond to Senator Tallian's question. So at the end of the Daniels administration, or some point in the Daniels administration, there were a number of bonds that were defeased. At that point, we kind of started this bifurcated process of how we would handle the ongoing R&R needs for those buildings. So we fund kind of an R&R formula for those recently defeased buildings, where we set those dollars aside at IFA. For the older facilities, if you will, we kind of go through the normal capital process of there's a specific project requested in the budget for that specific biennium, and we execute those kind of as those needs come up. But again, the newer ones that are defeased, we fund an R&R formula where I think IDOA and IFA and our office, and in these instances, DOC, kind of come up with like this 30-year timeline of what the projects will need to be executed, and we essentially fund a portion of that every year over 30 years, so that as needs come up, we can respond to those. You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
I'm sticking around for the next one too. So the next presentation, I'm going to help out.
Oh,
Jeff.
okay, all right.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Babb at DMHA. In late 2017, the state budget agency approved funding for a facility-wide risk assessment for all the state psychiatric hospitals. Risks were identified at each of the facilities with the exception of the newly opened Neurodiagnostic Institute. Of the risks identified, ligature risks, which are a component of the physical environment that one could use for purpose of inflicting self-harm, are of primary concern. To ensure the patient safety and to remain in compliance with Joint Commission and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services standards, we plan to begin the process of addressing and mitigating the highest risks identified within the state hospitals. The risk exists across 5 of the 6 hospitals. Therefore, we're requesting funding to mitigate risks through a system-wide approach, and Matt Kent will address the approach.
Thanks. So the DMHA approached us with kind of this concern regarding kind of the scope of this project. Once we had looked at it, we realized that Public Works isn't really the expert in this area, and we suggested that we looked into hiring a consultant for this work to kind of help guide this process with the Joint Commission findings. So we, once the funding is approved, Public Works and DMHA will work together to identify a consultant who not only knows the anti-ligature world, but also has a relationship with Joint Commission that can kind of help guide us through the process. So Initially, this consultant will review the documentation we already have. They'll work with each facility to determine the needs of each facility. That'll help us kind of establish a capital plan for the next couple of years, because this isn't going to be just a one-year plan. This is most likely going to be a couple of years that we'll be working with this consultant to get this done. So as that process goes on, this consultant will help kind of guide the front end. They'll oversee some of the work that's being done so that we know that, one, the work is being done correctly, and that it meets the specifications of the Joint Commission. Also along the way, they'll be doing any of the necessary reporting to the Joint Commission to make sure that, that they see the progress they're wanting to see. So again, we expect this relationship to be quite a few years with this consultant as we kind of address this issue. Questions on that?
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, you're going to have to get a little more specific, because I was very confused when I read this. So I said you're going to have to get a little more specific, because I was very confused. What exactly? So is the 2.3 million, which is about less than 500,000 per the 5 of the 6 hospitals, is that for physical changes now, or is that for the consultant you're hiring?
So initially, we expect that to be for the consultant, but just being in the beginning of this process, we don't know the contract amount of what that consultant's going to be. So the funding initially, the 2.3, will be for consultant services. Anything left over of that will be to start making the physical changes at the facilities.
Okay, I don't mean to be, but, so we're going to give you 2.3 million, and you haven't hired a consultant yet, but they're going to know you have this much money to spend, and it may actually, none of it may be actually spent on physical changes. It could all go to their contract, which could be for several years.
It's feasible, yeah. I mean, the scope of this project is rather large. I don't know if Jeff or if someone else would want to
No, I
speak to
don't.
the...
So could you explain to me, like, for example, this is the problem, and this is what we have to change, and we don't know how to change it?
When we received the risk assessments back that we did in 2017, it was pretty much every item in every hospital was identified as a potential ligature point that a patient could tie something to and commit suicide. Every hospital has a different approach. Discussing this with Public Works, state budget, and others, we just thought the best approach is to hire a consultant that works with the Joint Commission. But we don't want to come back year after year after year saying we need more money. So.
But we're going to give you a lot of money, and you're not really sure. You know what the problem is, or you don't? I understand you know the risk, but it sounds like you don't know if there are physical changes, like maybe more cameras, or we need more people to watch the people who are at risk. And so because of that, is that what I'm hearing, DMH and Public Works, and you all don't really know how to fix it, so you're bringing in a consultant to tell us how to fix it? Which is fine if you don't know how to fix it.
Essentially, Public Works isn't an expert in this field. And so with DMHA, there's mixed responses to what each facility needs, and each facility was looking at it kind of differently. So this is going to standardize what we need across the board at each facility.
Okay, that part I have to say is a little bit disturbing. I mean, I understand the physical structures of each of the facilities may be different, and maybe the patients are slightly different, but...
Just to speak to that a little bit, so I think, and if I'm wrong, please jump in here and help me out, or correct me. Oftentimes when you get auditors that come out for these processes, they'll even say something is wrong here where another auditor won't say that it's wrong. So, or they'll have a finding for one thing that then the next auditor won't find as an issue. And so we view this consultant as someone who's going to help us work with the Joint Commission, find out what exactly is wrong with each one of these, what needs fixed, and then start working down that list. So we'll have a priority list, and just eventually, and we'll be able to come to you guys with, here's the need, this large need, and we'll start working down that list.
Is there an issue with the 5 hospitals all feeling territorial and they have the best solution in their...
That's part of the problem, yes.
Okay, that's, all right. Thank you.
I just want to say that for the second time in a row now, my question has been the same as Senator Brown's question, except she asked it first. But I do want to say I had the same questions, the same concerns about this project.
And I appreciate this line of inquiry. And I guess just a maybe naive question, but aren't there just some industry standards And are we paying a lot of money for someone to share those industry standards with us, or?
That's the difficulty of this. There is no real industry standards. And like Matt alluded to, each inspector has their own opinion right now. We have nothing in writing that we can go to saying fix A, B, C, and D.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, appreciate it. So which hospital doesn't have this issue? Because you said 5 of the 6.
Neurodiagnostic Institute.
The brand-new one.
Yes.
All right, thank
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Oh, Senator Italian.
And this one more thing that you said, this $2.3 million is ongoing over, you said, several years' worth?
So we anticipate this contract being the consultant, we anticipate them being on board basically once we start these assessments all the way through completion of, getting everything changed out and all the reporting that'll finish throughout there. It's hard to say if the 2.3 is going to be all used by the consultant or not, because their contract will be we anticipate it being several years long, because this is going to be a several-year-long process to change all of these items out. So we want them on board during the whole duration of that. So the 2.3 very well could go towards that consultant, but we could come in a little bit below that, and we use that money towards any of the physical changes that need to happen.
So it's possible that over the next several budget cycles, you could come back here asking for, all right, now we need like $5 million to do X, Y, Z physical changes.
Not only possible, but that will happen. And so once this consultant gives us this report or helps us out with this assessment, then they've got to come back and ask for the funding to start making those changes. So they'll be before the committee basically every time they're asking for those funds.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, and just to try to clarify again, and correct me if I get this wrong, I think the back of the envelope estimates that we've talked about so far is that these total improvements might be anywhere from 16 million to, I think I heard like a 34 million number. And so the 2.3 here will have the contractor help us identify the problems, prioritize that work, help us come up with a plan for attack, and then whatever's left will be used to, so maybe it's $1 million for the contractor, and then the other 1.3 will be to take that first, make that first attempt to start to correct that work identified, the 16 to 35, 34 million.
Correct, and I think if I may, I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring a consultant in, because once we realized the scope of this issue, we realized it was out of our wheelhouse, basically.
Any other questions? Representative Porter.
Just a quick question. Has there anything happened recently with CMS or JACO that initiated these movements on this issue?
They brought it to our attention several years ago, but it was never really a big push. Within the last year, they've issued standards that they expect to see improvements made. They expect a timeline. They just don't want to say, yes, we'll get to them.
Any other questions?
If I could follow up on that, Representative Porter, just part of that is this consultant will help reporting back to the Joint Commission to let them know we are working on this issue, so that the Joint Commission understands that there's a plan in place and that we're resolving the issue.
Anything else? All right, thank you. While we're waiting on DOC, I'm going to take a 30-second timeout. I dropped the ball, and I didn't realize it until I had to call on him. But I want to congratulate Zach Jackson on his appointment as Budget Director and welcome him to the committee. I'm used to seeing him hiding in a corner on his computer, so when I had to actually recognize him, I realized I forgot to introduce him. So, welcome, Zach.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Director, members of the committee. I appreciate your time this morning to present these 4 projects. In a prison, there's a number of things that wear out on a regular basis. Mechanical cell doors is one of those. The first project involves replacement of 54 high-security cell doors at our WCU facility in Westville. It is where we house the predatory offenders of our population. These are the most dangerous of all the offenders that we deal with. These doors cycle hundreds of times a week, hundreds of times a month, hundreds of thousands of times over their lifetime. The mechanicals eventually wear out, the computers get worn out, and this is for replacement of 54 of the 220 doors. The other three phases of this project will come to you in the next biennial budget. This is for the first of 54 doors. All engineering is complete. We're ready to go to construction upon approval of funds.
Any questions? Okay.
The second project involves similar case, lower security door replacement at our Plainfield Correctional Facility. Two structures known as West and Central dorms, 172 doors. These are a detention door, a hinged detention door, just like the preceding doors, much lower security level, but they receive wear and tear every day. Just as in the previous project, they have come to the point in their life cycle where they need to be replaced. There's acute security concerns with the doors in that unit. We've had a couple instances where our clients have been able to breach the door and get out and cause issues. This project, once again, is fully engineered and ready to go to bid upon award of funds, or excuse me, on release of funds.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Next.
At Putnamville Correctional Facility, we have a small segregation unit that was constructed in 1988 and a recreation building that was constructed in 1998. Both of these facilities, they have different roofs. Both are at the end of their life cycles. The second building, the recreation building, being a shingled roof, the first being a built-up modified bitumen roof. They are both at the end of their life cycles. Both are ready for roofing replacement. This is the standard life cycle of every facility with a flat roof on it. We have packaged these two projects together. We'll see a synergistic advantage of 10-15% by building these two projects out together and give them to one contractor. They are requested for funding together and will be bid out together. Both are fully engineered and ready to go out for bid.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you answered my question. So since it's a flat roof, the commercial standard is still just about 20 years. Is that what you're telling me?
The director and I in other roles have had this conversation over many years. We have a lot of buildings under roof in the Department of Correction. This roof is kind of different. Our standard's 40 years, but I have something that no other agency has. I have available labor to go and maintain the roofs. So like buying a motor vehicle, if you give it perfect maintenance, you go and pressure wash it every year, that costs money most agencies can't afford. We have the labor, we have the time. We perfectly maintain our roofs. Some of our roofs, our experimental roof was put on the year that I took this job 15 years ago, and it looks the same as the day it was put on. How long will it last? I think 40 years. I'm not willing to tell you that, or I'm not willing to swear to that, but I honestly believe that with good maintenance, like maintaining an automobile, you can get these roofs to last for 40 years. A lot of agencies don't have the ability to invest that time and money into the ongoing maintenance, or excuse me, the time and very little money that it takes to maintain those roofs. So our roofs, while these have lasted about 20 years, the industry standard, the modern roofs that we're putting on today will last much longer, and whoever takes over from me when I retire from this job, I hope will continue this on, and I'm anxious to find out how long some of these roofs will last. The final project is at the Correctional Industrial Facility in Pendleton, Indiana. The Correctional Industrial Facility was built in 1987. It holds 1,400 Security Level 2 offenders in a medium security environment. Its primary job is to provide work and job training there on the facility. We've done a lot of work at this facility over the last few years. It's coming to the point in its life cycle where I'll present to you roofs and some other things over the next couple biennia. This is the preparatory step for that is putting upgraded environmental controls into the housing units and replacing the rooftop units so they will already be maintained when we go to put roofs on them over the next 4 years. This replaces all the pneumatic controls with digital controls. I think I've presented these kind of projects in front of this committee for over a decade now, and you probably get tired of hearing it, but it's just the normal life cycle of one of these structures. This goes from a pneumatic control system to a digital control system, a modern, maintainable digital control system. It happens to save about $20,000 or $30,000 worth of electrical energy every year, in this case, from reduction of air conditioning costs, so the energy running the big chiller units. So does that pay for the project? No, but is it a nice benefit? Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have School for the Deaf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jeremy Hawk, Director of Operations for the Indiana School for the Deaf. I'm coming before you today to ask for release of additional funding to proceed with implementation of a visual communication system on our campus. As some of you might be aware, we do not have a mass communication system capable of reaching our students and staff as a part of the deaf community. We can't simply use a PA or intercom system like a public school would, and we do not have visual signage around campus now to adequately alert them of emergencies and communicate with them on a day-to-day basis. Originally, we did get approval for around $230,000 for this project from the admin action process. And working with IDOA, we have increased the scope of the project by adding 2 additional outdoor signs and adding backup batteries to each of those signs, which push the project up. And we're asking for an additional $84,000 today.
Thank you. I appreciate that that would be a concern, but I'm just curious, I mean, if the signs may not reach everybody and the students are out on your vast campus, have you thought of any kind of personal device so that they always have a way to be contacted in case they're not in visual contact with the sign?
We worked with the contractor as well as IDOA to identify the range of each of those signs, and it was established at about 400 feet. So that's part of the reason why we added additional signs, is that we made sure that that range blanketed the areas around campus where students would typically be. There's very few areas that would not be covered, but there are laundry facilities, maintenance buildings that are in the corners of the campus where students really shouldn't be.
You didn't consider a personal device that each child would somehow be notified since they can't hear?
No, not to the children personally. This does include 300 mobile application licenses that we would have our coaches, our staff, our teachers install on their personal phones. That they would be alerted to in case the system was activated. So in addition to the large signs outside of the buildings, we could have the people interacting directly with the students be notified via their cell phone.
Are the 300 licenses for all people who are deaf or hard of hearing?
They would be for administrators and those dealing directly with the students, so they wouldn't necessarily be deaf or hard of hearing.
You're paying for a license and I get a notice that there's a tornado coming, and I could be hearing, and I'm gonna get that, but we're not, if the kid can't sees the sign, then I gotta go find them to tell them.
Well, they would be for, like I said, athletic coaches. So we have a football field that is kind of far away from the buildings. We would have a sign, that's going to be installed in that area. And the idea behind the signs is that they would flash very brightly to gather attention. And then once the attention was diverted to those signs, we would be able to scroll the appropriate messaging. So if it is a tornado, that they can get inside a building and take shelter. But in addition, we would have this coach or the student activity coordinator, whoever's supervising the children at that time, have that device on them that they could be notified as well.
So there'll be ongoing costs to maintain the 300.
The mobile applications are included in the package. There's a small license fee that would be on an annual basis. It's not more than $1,500, I believe.
Any other questions? do you have a way, I know college campuses now on their cell phones send out an alert. Is there any way to do it through their personal devices or some kind of a emergency alert through the school?
We do have a system. Each of the students in the middle school and high school have a one-to-one iPad. And we do have a system that they use that they could be notified. It's how we alert parents of issues on campus and send home, newsletters and that type of thing. It would benefit the students who are in a building, as we have now. We do have signage in buildings now. Primarily, this is for people who are in passing periods, who are walking between buildings, going to lunch, or out on the athletic fields, where they may not have that device on them.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Department of Transportation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Excuse me. Thank you for your time today. My name is Ryan Hargis with the Indiana Department of Transportation Office of Facility Management. Today, for your consideration, INDOT is requesting the authorization of funds in the amount of $1,704,650 for the replacement of 24 roof structures across the state. These buildings include salt storage domes, unit garage facilities, testing facilities, and equipment storage buildings. The conditions of these roofs were flagged for replacement based on our annual building assessment process. The replacements will be shingle and membrane. The budget amounts were based on quotes and recommendations from qualified contractors and reviewed by INDOT's facility managers and facilities project managers. Once approved and the funds are available, we will competitively bid the projects and work through the Department of Administration's Division of Public Works.
Senator Brown.
All right, so we heard about the DOC and their flat roofs, and it
Yes.
doesn't sound like any of these, or thank you, Mr. Chairman, any of these are flat roofs, and yet what's the life cycle?
So the shingled roofs are 15 years is what the industry standard is for the shingled roofs. The majority of these are salt dome structures that have really steep pitches. And then the membrane roofs, the industry standard is 20 to 25 years.
15 years, that's all we get out of that?
For the shingled, yeah, the industry standard is 15 years.
Asphalt shingles like you would see on a,
Correct.
and why is it so short?
I think there's a variety of reasons. Specifically for our needs, our salt domes have really pitched roofs. They're very steeply pitched, so they don't last as long as a normal type of roof like that. You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the university projects. For next hour, we'll be hearing from Purdue. That's right. Get comfortable. Oh, I have a question. Do you guys, after this, do you have any other buildings left to work on your campus? Because every meeting, you seem to be the big winner with all the projects.
Well, you'll notice we're adding to some of the buildings by purchasing a few. Yeah, we've run out. No, there'll be plenty to do after the after the next trustee meeting. We haven't addressed the budget buildings yet. But good to be here today, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Tony Hahn with Purdue University. I have 7 projects for your consideration today. Not a record, but close. The first on your agenda is the purchase of a facility that used to be known as the University Church. It is adjacent to the Union and the Grant Street parking garage on the West Lafayette campus. It consists of about a 32,000 square foot multi-story facility. It has not been a active church for about 4 years. It has 2 student organizations that operate in it now. We would purchase the facility for future use in the fact that it's very close to the core of our academic campus, and that space was identified in our long-term capital plan as an academic space. In the current condition that it's in, it can be used for lecture hall style classrooms. It can also, I think what will be most helpful is it's enough space and enough administrative space now to use for swing space. As we renovate one building and move staff and labs and other things out of one building for temporary use, this would be very close and very usable space for swing space while we renovate a different on-campus building. So it is our plan to keep it as in the condition it is now. It's a very usable 32,000 square foot building. The 2 tenants, we would continue their leases until the end of their terms and then consider extending those. They are a student-run entrepreneur co-working space and a student organization for software development. The purchase price of the building is $2.9 million, and we have an appraised value from Jones Lasang Sal at $3.9 million. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. You said you're going to look at extending those 2 leases?
Sure.
For those, you said consider. Does that mean that's inevitable, that they're going to leave, or what?
Well,
because I mean, to consider, it means a lot in regards to that at the end of their lease.
It would be if they wanted to continue. We can't use the entire 32,000 square feet right away, and so they're making good use of it. And their lease continues for a few more years. And we would assume the lease from the purchase, and so extend to the end of their term. And then if they wanted to stay, we have the space for them, and they're an established organization.
Okay, and do you think the terms of the lease will stay at the same rate, or will they be priced out?
I don't know that. And
okay, I mean, those are things that I would consider.
Sure.
That we should look at, but just watching.
The 2 organizations we have in there are 2 that we would like to foster and be successful, because one is what's called the Anvil. It's a student-run co-working space. So if you're a student and you have an idea or development, you can go to the Anvil for free first, work on it with other students, work on the business plan, and then from there you move to the Foundry. And I believe you've toured the Foundry before, which is our obviously an entrepreneurial center as well. So that's in the entrepreneurial ecosystem that we want to foster. So those are important organizations to us.
Thank you, Tony. How much of the operating reserves does this take?
Of the balance?
Yes.
I would have to get that balance for you. There are a few items here today that use operating reserves, and I can get that fund balance for you.
Are your operations going forward covered in your operating reserves? You're not going to increase your baseline budget to pay for the operations of a new building, are you?
Well, operating reserves are funded from those unbudgeted revenues that we receive through interest, investments, donations. And so we have our budget already in place, in fact, for FY20. And so if it's not budgeted as revenue this year, and we were to receive it over the course of the year through donations, interest, then it would become operating reserve. So there'd be no reason to increase any sort of revenue to pay for this if the reserves are in place.
I guess I'm thinking of 2021, you're not going to ask for your baseline to go up because you have more space to cover.
No, and in fact, unless it's academic space, it wouldn't be in the R&R formula either. Now, we would still ask, obviously, for... Go ahead, Senator Talion? Okay.
So one more to piggyback on that, which I was going to wait till the end. So what the 40 million that you get from Big Ten Network, where does that money go to? Is that backfilling this or what?
No, so the Big Ten Network,
Which is off your budget, right?
well, it's in our athletic program, it's auxiliaries.
Okay.
It's in our auxiliary budget.
You don't use the whole 40+ million for athletic program, do you?
No, in fact, 12 million was committed to a student success building called the Kroc Leadership Center. So it pays for a building on campus where we have student advising and student organizations. And then most of it does stay in the athletic program to pay some debt service on construction projects and other athletic. Because you recall, we do not subsidize the athletic program with state appropriations or our general operating or student fees. It's a self-sufficient fund.
Is it fair to say some of that money probably goes to pay for the tuition for some of the athletes, doesn't it?
For the fee remission, for the scholarships,
It could be used,
Could.
let's put it that way. Maybe you don't, but you could use that contract to pay for their
Could.
tuition.
good. I think most of ours comes through the John Purdue Club. I don't know that
People
they're-
sponsor the.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, continue.
The second is right across the street, the Purdue Memorial Union Club Hotel. And if you've stayed in the Union Club Hotel, which most of you have if you visited campus, you'll know that it is in need of some renovation. It was first built in 1929 and added on to in 1953, and that's what makes for those long disjointed hallways that you get lost in. The renovation will be for 90,000 square feet of hotel rooms. It'll redo the project includes the lobby space and an 8,500 square foot restaurant. So as part of the union, this is also part of the School of Hotel Tourism Management. And so it's a living laboratory that is, the hotel is staffed by students and operated by students. And this will result in a more attractive facility with more modern hotel amenities. That'll be a better living, learning laboratory for the students. We will lose about 10 rooms. We have 192 rooms, and we'll lose about 10 rooms through reconfiguration and making larger suites. And we would hope to open in time for the fall of 2020. And this is completely funded by gifts, $35 million total, funded by gifts, and will be a highly visible improvement to our visitors on campus. Not to my knowledge, no. No, it's still the Union Club Hotel.
All right, continue.
The third project is also a purchase, but this is at our Fort Wayne campus, Purdue Fort Wayne. This is proposed the acquisition of a building called Park 3000, which is a 76,000 square foot, 3-story facility located at 3000 Coliseum Boulevard, which is across Coliseum and just to the east of Crescent of our Purdue Fort Wayne campus. It's also adjacent to the Ivy Tech campus. It used to be formerly a Brown Mackie College building. The purchase price is $3.85 million. We have, again, Jones Lang LaSalle valued it at over $4 million. The timing of this comes at a good time. When we looked at our long-term plan at Fort Wayne, we realized that in the next 10 years, 10-year capital plan or so, we would likely look for about a $28 to $34 million building for our business, leadership, and career development operations to grow that Dormer School of Business. And this $3.85 million building that's already classroom ready would completely replace that need for that $30 million facility. It was recently renovated by Brown Mackie. It will take very little repair and rehabilitation to make it classroom ready. And so we would move the Dormer School of Business there. We would also move the career services and some development office space there, a welcome center for the east side of campus, as well as some student support services to that space.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's actually not directly adjacent to Ivy Tech, and so my concern or question, I guess, is, are there any plans to physically link the campus? I mean, we have that very elaborate, extravagant bridge going between Purdue, Fort Wayne, and Ivy Tech now, which is a very long, expensive project. So what are the future plans for that? Because this is close, but not walkable. There are no sidewalks there. There's no crossing path.
It is to the east, and there's a few houses there right on Coliseum, and it's on the same side of Crescent as our student housing, but you would have to cross Coliseum. In the short term, and we wouldn't be able to offer classes there till probably fall of 2020. In the short term, we would be running a shuttle back and forth to get students there.
The CityLink shuttle that you have running now that
The
runs?
campus would provide transportation back and forth to get people there while we examine. As you know, we have, 2 bridges now over Crescent for the housing, and then the one over Coliseum has taken a while. So we need to take a look at how best and safely to get the students across that.
Yeah, hopefully not another, that was more than a $3 million project, the last one that you're working on. So I guess my other concern is, because it's not actually close to your housing. It's not far, but it's not close. So my other question is, are you protecting the neighborhood, or do you have any, I mean, in terms of, I assume it's just going to be a daytime campus, because there's a very extensive neighborhood around 2 sides of that.
There is residential around it, and this would be a very traditional classroom and administrative building that would be used during the day, daylight hours. I don't foresee any night classes in this building or any nighttime activity.
Because access is somewhat limited as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
There's adequate parking, but you're right, access
Right.
at this time is a little
At
more
this
challenging.
time?
Well, you never know what the development in the area will be. I think and not our development, but development around on the other side of Coliseum, the Verizon building and other things that have
Right,
been.
well, they're turning that into student housing, so that's what you were referring to in terms of accessing that, I assume, right? Which is also not accessible right now. All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
The 4th and 5th projects are related. We listed them separately because the review process are under 2 separate statutes. One is a construction project, the Wade utility connection, and the other is the lease of the ground that will be connected to. I'll talk about them generally together, but we'll work through them individually too. The construction project, the Wade utility connection, proposes to connect our existing power plant to a proposed new power plant that will be built adjacent to ours. And I'll back up a little bit and explain how this can work. Duke Energy proposes to build a 16 megawatt power plant in the West Lafayette area to serve an expanding population base. The proposal is to build for Duke to build the power plant adjacent to Wade Power Plant, which is ours. We would connect the two, and that's the construction project, connect the steam tunnels, and Purdue would purchase the steam from the Duke Power Plant. So I think it helps to understand why the steam is valuable for us and for Duke. Purdue operates a 40 megawatt power plant. We have 4 boilers. In those boilers, 3 are natural gas, 1 is a multi-fuel boiler. We generate steam. Heat water generates steam. That steam does 3 things for us. 1, generates electricity, turns turbines, generates electricity. 2, we can then superheat and desuperheat that steam and ship it all over campus to heat buildings. and sterilize things. And 3, we can take that same steam and turn a chiller that chills water, and that chilled water, it's much like a refrigerator in that it compresses it and chills water. We ship that around campus, and that cools buildings through chillers on buildings. And that's all in so we use all that steam for those 3 things. So we have heat and chilled water and electricity. A Duke plant would simply be generating electricity for its ratepayers, and the steam does not have, after they make electricity, does not have as much value to them. It does have value to us, to Purdue, as we could purchase the steam, obviously lower than we can make it since they have already made the steam. It would allow us better utilization of our 4 existing boilers. So some of our boilers are nearing 50 years old. So if we had an auxiliary steam supply, we could lower we could take some boilers offline for maintenance, have better scheduling, we could lower the operating percentage and turn them down a little bit and extend their life. We can defer some capital expenses on some boilers. Now, the amount of steam that we would be purchasing, we'd purchase everything that they could make, and it would be about 50,000 pounds an hour. And that's how steam is rated, is pounds per hour. We generate now, we use about 300,000 pounds per hour now, on average throughout the year. On peak loads, we can generate 800,000 pounds per hour. So this is a small amount of our total need, not insignificant, but it will help us maintain our 4 boilers that we currently have much better. It'll extend the life of them. It'll also give us some redundancy that if we have a serious problem, we will also be able to tap into some power there for redundancy, or also use extra steam if we run into a polar vortex type situation. So the construction project is the physical connection of the 2 plants together that will ship the steam from Duke to the Purdue power plant and then be incorporated into our regular steam cycle that I explained, that we make electricity, heat, and cool buildings. So that is the construction project. The lease, the reason the lease is connected is that we lease 1 acre to Duke for the construction of the power plant directly next to our power plant so that it's close enough to utilize that steam. That's a 35-year lease for Duke, to Duke for the power plant at the nominal price of $100 for the life of it, and then we'll purchase the steam over those 35 years. The construction is $6.5 million and won't likely start until Duke receives all of its regulatory approval, which would be likely in 2020. Now, the funding of this construction has some history here that predates most of us in the room. We propose to use bond proceeds from a 2007 bond issue that we refer to as Series X, and that's an internal name that we've used. The background on Series X bond is that in 2005, we started a comprehensive energy management plan, worked with the Office of Government Efficiency and this body and others to look at our long-term energy management concerns. That was in 2005. We did some engineering and some architect work on that. In 2007, in the 2007 budget, there was bonding authority for a project called Boiler Number 6 for $53 million. And Boiler Number 6 was to be a coal boiler in our facility. We issued the debt, and then shortly after that, in working with the Office of Government Efficiency and some other folks, realized that a coal boiler was not what we needed to spend that $53 million on. This was 07, so we're here at 08. Natural gas prices become more competitive. There's obviously some environmental considerations as well. So we hold off on the coal boiler, and we meet with this body again and other leaders, and realize that we're going to hold off on the boiler. In the meantime, 2009 budget occurs, and $16 million of bonding authority were issued for the Health and Human Sciences lab renovation and the IU School of Medicine upgrades on the Lafayette campus. Instead of, it was decided, and by this body and other leaders, and approved in July of 2011, I believe, instead of issuing the new debt for $16 million, use the proceeds that we still had from the issuance of the $53 million and apply it toward the Health and Human Sciences building. And that was approved and that was done. And then since then, we worked on a comprehensive energy management plan and considered what to do with the balance. And in July of 2012, approached this body to spend nearly the balance of it on a steam production and distribution plan throughout campus. So of the $53 million that we received, one, we've been giving back to the state any interest that we've earned on it to the amount of about $1 million. We have used it for, all approved by this body. We've used it for a Health and Human Services building. We've upgraded the IU School of Medicine on our campus with the $16 million. And then $33 million were proposed to be spent on steam distribution upgrades throughout campus. Through good construction management and some savings that we found, we have a balance of $11 million yet. So this is $11 million remaining from that 07 bond issuance. And we propose to spend 6.5 of that on this utility-related project within the spirit of that original bond issue to connect these and increase our utility capacity. So that's the long history of Series X bonds.
Thank you. On the steam generation that you're going to get out of this new project, does Purdue expect to make to sell that steam?
No, we wouldn't sell the steam. In fact, we'll buy steam from Duke.
Buy it?
We will buy it in a procurement contract.
But you're already producing steam on your campus.
We are. This will give us additional steam so that we can lower how hard we use our boilers. We can take some boilers offline, maintain them, do the kind of maintenance we need to extend the life of them, defer capital investment in them by running them at a lower capacity because we have new steam introduced into our system.
So with that new steam introduced to your system, you're going to lower the usage of what kind of?
Of our 4 boilers that we currently operate.
So you're going to lower the usage of 4 existing boilers and build more boilers.
We aren't building any new boilers.
Well, but I guess what I'm asking you is, let's just forget the boilers. Let's talk about the steam, because that's the ultimate product. So you've got adequate steam on campus right now to operate your steam, to operate your campus, right?
We do.
So you're going to now take 4 fully functional steam systems, lower the usage to add time for it to survive, and you're going to bring on some new systems to do that. I guess I'm trying to see the map. Is that the map?
And we would not, as Purdue, we would not bring on any new systems. We would simply buy steam at a rate lower than we can make it because we don't have the energy built into boiling the water to make the steam. On the other end of the pipe of the steam, it sits Duke Energy. They're making electricity in this 16 megawatt power plant for their customers in the West Lafayette area.
That was going to be my next question. So you're leasing a piece of land to Duke Energy, and Duke is going to take that land, build the system, and then have their customers pay for that system.
Their ratepayers, and that's pending at the IURC now, all explaining what their levelized cost of utility is. And so like any other new power plant, the considerations are what will it cost ratepayers, where, how will it affect the rates of those payers. And so they realize that they have a need now for additional capacity. Duke does in the area. They were going to build a plant one way or another. To them, normally, steam is a waste. It's a waste stream. They boil it, they make electricity, send it out to ratepayers, and it dissipates through the air. We now will buy it from them, which should, in theory, then lower their cost of operation, and that is factored into their IURC discussion of what their levelized rate would be. And so they have an outlet for a waste stream. We are buying it less expensively than we can make it, so it works well for both. They're generating power for a need that they identified up there. That's their grid up there. It is very well situated because it's very close to their grid, because obviously then we are Duke, we're near that Duke grid, so they can tap into that and feed their customers very easily.
Okay.
And it's a use of an acre that is generally undevelopable around our power plant.
I was going to ask where it was located. But
Directly west of our current power plant, which is not very attractive for other commercial or housing development.
Yeah, I was going to say I was going to do some land prospecting in West Lafayette, since I don't know if I can get an acre and a half, 0.86 acres for $3 million and anywhere else but West Lafayette. Thanks.
Don't forget the building that's on that.
The old building?
The church.
The old building that has asbestos and what? No, don't give me.
Thank you. So I just want to get a couple things straight. They're going to build this power plant on an acre, and that's all it takes.
That's my understanding too. And it's my understanding a 16 megawatt power plant is a fairly small plant.
Okay.
But will provide them the extra coverage they need in the area.
And do you have any idea how much that's going to cost Duke to build that?
It's my understanding that that power plant is a $55 million investment by Duke.
All right. So now you've got a $55 million power plant sitting on land that you own. At the end of 35 years, who owns the power plant?
Within the lease agreement, there are really three options. One, they can extend the lease and continue operating it, and we'll continue buying the steam. Two, they can decommission it, tear it down, and obviously we have the land back. Or three, we could take over operations of it in some sort of purchase agreement and make, again, electricity, steam, that would support our campus.
That's what I wanted to know. So those options are already set out
Yes.
in this lease agreement?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
And I wouldn't want to forecast what energy generation looks like in 35 years anyway.
Right.
So.
Sorry, I would. There was a couple things. Are you at the end of your presentation?
That's entirely up to you.
Okay, you got more projects? I'll hold off.
You have $11 million in a pot that we're paying fee replacement on a bond authority.
That's right.
Why don't you pay that back early? Why don't you pay that bond off early?
I don't know. That's something we deal with IFA and budget agency on. We've been sending back any interest that we've made on it to about $1 million. But I don't know if those discussions have been had about early, satisfying it early. And Series X has been, and that's been something that we've talked about again for almost 10 years now, that we've had that balance. It's also, and let me back up to that, it is one part of a much larger bond issue. So Series X was about 90 million total. So this was one of them, one of the projects. Excuse me? It did not get used for the boiler number 6 project, and then we have been using it for either the Health and Human Services Bonding Authority replacement or other utility projects along the way, and trying to find ones within the same general area of utility.
Any other questions? Keep going.
So that's the Wade utility connection and the Duke lease. The next is another purchase of a facility in West Lafayette. This is a highly visible building at 2550 Northwestern Avenue. It's the State Farm building. It's the former regional headquarters for State Farm Insurance. It's 22 acres and 255,000 gross square feet, and it was a large regional headquarters for State Farm Insurance. This would provide us with a centralized place to move many of our functions that are currently disjointed around campus and around the community. It would also free up about 50,000 square feet of Purdue-owned space on campus and eliminate $2 million in rent per year by consolidating the different business units and data center. We would move the data center out of the basement of the math building and free up that core academic campus space. It pays for itself in under a decade by the leases that we would not be paying over time. It has, because it was an office building, it has a great IT space with a raised floor already. It also has about 20,000 square feet of high bay space that we could put industrial and commercial lab space in. This would also be close enough to campus to be swing space for labs and other facilities as we renovate one building and move them out to another. The purchase price is $6.7 million, and our appraisal from Integra Realty is as is $7.1 million. And this would give us the opportunity to free up some space on campus, move some disjointed people together, and get them actually closer to campus now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a quick question for you. So this is a State Farm Insurance facility. So what's the taxes on that? What are we going to lose? What is the city of Lafayette's going to lose? Are you paying anything in lieu of taxes in regards to taking this building?
Well, it would be for the city of West Lafayette, and it would move from obviously State Farm Insurance Company to the Purdue University ownership. So it would be, to the best of my knowledge, then off of the tax roll. I don't know what the assessed value is now, what they pay.
Could you get that information to me in regards to the value of that? Because I think here you go again. The university is buying property and taking money away from local government, and we continue to give you opportunities. And I mean, I know you boil her up, particularly after the last conversation. But we need to look at what's happening to local government, how we're suffocating and strangling them with these initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I would like to know that information ASAP.
I'll get that for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this building vacant right now?
Very small portion of it's being used by State Farm, and similar to the other, we would continue their lease, but they plan to wrap up their operations there in, I think, 2020.
Is it one of the larger office buildings in the area?
It is.
And there's no one else who has agreed to assume the lease or take it over in the meantime, which is why it's available to you?
It could have, at one point, State Farm had over 1,000 employees in it. It has its own cafeteria, and so it is a very large structure, and not everyone would be able to utilize all that space.
When State Farm's, the small group that's there now, when their lease is up, are you planning on leasing any of the parts of the building out, or are you going to use it wholly for Purdue?
I think it will depend on when the rest of our leases
terminate.
The $2
when-
million savings
Exactly,
leases?
when we can move our facilities into there, or if we have a short-term need for swing space. So we would have to see, after they're vacated, what might be appropriate.
But you anticipate needing $250,000 or 250,000 square feet additional, roughly?
We could use that we would free that up in other places, but yes, we could use most of that.
What would be the construction costs of a 250,000 square foot building, roughly?
If we build it new, probably $250 a square foot. So,
All right, I got
Yeah.
that in my head, thanks. All right.
any other questions? All right, continue. And finally, the last is a lease. This is a one-year lease for one academic year of 86 apartments at the Aspire apartment complex in Discovery Park. This Aspire complex is brand new, just coming online this fall, which is why we were able to get one large chunk of 86 apartments, which would be a total of 340 beds. This will help with our overflow of enrollment that you know is a problem in every fall. And we'll lease this for 1 year until our new resident halls are online in 2020. The lease commitment is $2.7 million for that 9-month term, and it would just be that one academic year. The lease is paid for by the housing that the housing fees that the students pay. Our goal is to make it as similar to a resident hall as possible. We will have resident assistants, or RAs, on each floor. The utilities will be included. It'll be as easy as signing up for a resident hall on the student housing website, that this will be one of the options for undergrads or other class, or even grad students. It's about 40% of the entire building. Aspire is an 835-bed complex in our Discovery Park District, which you'll recall is a 10-year investment plan for our west side of campus, and this was the first housing development in there. The price is the student price is very similar to the resident hall prices and other similar university-operated facilities. Any questions? Senator Italian.
Thank you. Tony, what's the difference between, are the students getting a deal by having Purdue rent this, and are you guaranteeing rooms to Aspire? In other words, my question, I guess, is, either you could guarantee the lease and rent these out, or the kids could just go directly to Aspire and do the same thing, right? Are they getting a better deal this way?
They are.
And what kind of difference are we talking about?
Almost 20%.
Oh, okay.
Almost 20%.
All right.
We agree, when we approached Aspire and to take 40% of their inventory there, they agreed to lock that down for a significant discount.
Okay.
And so that, just for reference, and Senator Taylor mentioned real estate in West Lafayette, and I think most university towns are trending this way. But the average per bed cost for an apartment, not counting utilities, not counting anything, in the West Lafayette area is about $1,031 per month. And so this, and the Aspire as brand new and suite style rooms come in a bit higher than that. There's a lot of options, but it comes in quite a bit higher. And so there's a significant discount for the students to live there.
So you're guaranteeing a certain number of rooms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're guaranteeing them the rent on a certain number of their...
That's right.
And do you foresee any problem filling that?
No. No, in fact, this is one of several apartment complexes that we have pieced together apartments. This is the largest one, and so it rose to the level of state review because of the size of the lease payment. But we won't have any problems. We're looking likely toward another year of record enrollment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just did a little simple math here. just taking the $2.7 million, dividing that by 86, and then looking at 12 months. And I come up with $2,600 a month.
So,
I'm assuming you're going to have, that includes board too, room and board?
So the way to,
Yeah.
the way to look, it's a 9-month lease, and you would want to divide it by 340 beds, not the 86, because some are multi-bed units. And
I'm
so
looking at each apartment, though. You said you got 86 apartments. See, we get the point I'm trying. Did you RFP this, or was this a straight negotiation?
I believe this was a negotiation, as it was with other apartment complexes that we have that we're also renting from.
So the issue that I have is that you've broken it down by beds, but if you go to the older complexes in a community like that, and you break it down by apartment, which is the way they do it, it would have been more cost effective, in my opinion, to do it that way. But let's just use your bed thing. And you said 100, how many?
340 beds.
340 beds.
And here's something I learned that has changed in the past several years, Senator Taylor, and it's different when I was at school. If you were in a 4-bedroom apartment now, if you're looking to lease one, it used to be that 4 of us would get together, there'd be one price, and we'd agree to split it up. Landlords have changed that model now, and as an attorney, you can understand why for liability. So even in a 4-bedroom apartment now, each bed is rented separately. And
So you couldn't have 6 people in a 4-bedroom apartment like we had when I was in school?
Unfortunately, that between trying to limit that and trying to find that severable liability from somebody who skips out on their lease.
All right. Things have changed. I went to school just a few months ago. Anyway, the other thing that I did, I had my office do some research, and I just want to make sure I get this right. When we talk about all of the things, we talk about your projects and as well as others universities' projects, project by project, but we never put them all together. So I asked my staff to put some numbers together, and I just want, for information purposes, that over the next biennial budget, that Purdue University, with your Fort Wayne campus, your Northwest campus, the College of Vets, fee replacements, operating expenses, is going to get about $933 million from taxpayers. Just want to make sure that resonates very well, so that you understand that. And in saying that, I think it's good that you've found some cost-effective ways to kind of make sure that you're doing everything you can do. But one of the things that bothers me is you guys keep having reserves. Every project, you've got a reserve. And I understand the reserve, but when you spend the reserve, then you no longer have the reserve. What I'm saying is, if you have reserves and you're not spending the money that we give you, $933 million is a lot of money. And we need to be cognizant of the fact that we can be cost effective, but yet when the taxpayers ask these universities to do certain things, specifically the MWBBE program, you have not met your goals and you will continue not to meet them. I'm just making a point today that is critical, that you guys continue to look for ways to meet those goals. Because I get it, you guys are in the business of doing the right things, but $933 million is a lot of money, and it's taxpayers' dollars.
It is.
Okay.
And we are grateful and try to be incredibly good stewards of that money. Anything else, Mr. Chair?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about our new Multicultural Center. I'm Becca Rice, Vice President for Governmental Relations for Ball State. This building will replace our current Multicultural Center. And our current Multicultural Center was built in the 1930s. It's about 4,000 square feet. When President Mearns first got to campus, he was walking his dog one day and stumbled upon the old house on the southeast corner of our campus and thought, this can't be our Multicultural Center. And when he got back to campus the next week, asked if there was some other plan in the works. And so what amounted from that discussion is this new 10,500 square foot facility, and that will be in the center of our campus, what we're going to be calling the East Mall. You may recall you approved the Pruis Hall parking garage that was moved and is being constructed east of campus behind one of the churches on campus. This new Multicultural Center will also be accessible. Our former Multicultural Center, our current one, unfortunately is 2 floors, and those with mobile needs are unable to access the second floor where the library and conference rooms and those sorts of things are. So additionally, by bringing this Multicultural Center to the center of campus, it really emphasizes Ball State. As we embarked on our strategic planning process, we have 5 big goals, and one of those has to do with institutional and inclusive excellence. And so bringing the Multicultural Center right to the center of campus will be a great reminder as we have an increasing number of minorities on our campus, that we can have them right in the middle of campus and have all students, faculty, and staff participate in the programming and other opportunities that the Multicultural Center will provide. The space will be able to be moved around, so as the walls in some cases will move around so that different sorts of events and needs can be addressed throughout the years without major infrastructure changes. And additionally, there'll be a food service space. We believe that by having a small cafe or other type of space like that, one, we can suit some of the needs of the clubs that will be there. But really, the idea is to draw folks into the Multicultural Center with the use of space. There'll be good event space both inside and outside. And so we can make sure that as all students get the competencies they need to be in the workplace of today and tomorrow, that they are all interacting, all students are interacting together and being drawn into the Multicultural Center. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Becca. This is an exciting project for your campus. And it's actually an example of what I think other campuses could do with this Multicultural Center and what you're doing in an attract and inclusive projects. But I would be remiss if I didn't do the same thing that I did. Somebody might say I'm against Purdue or something if I didn't tell you what my staff found at you. You guys get $392 million, okay? It's a lot of money too over the next 2 years. You're making efforts to do the right thing, but just recognize that we need to move forward with that project and make sure it's important and make sure that the universities take it as important as we do. But great project, and I hope it's a success. It's going to be smack dab in the middle of campus, but you know, you guys keep making your effort in meeting the goals set by the state as well.
Wonderful. We appreciate that. And this project will be a CMC project. And so both the architect and manager, when this goes to bid, will be minority as well.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Budget Committee. I'm here to discuss the fiscal year 2019 Airport Development Grant Fund Fuel Excise Tax distribution. Last fall, the State Budget Committee reviewed the Build Indiana Fund appropriation in the amount of $2 million for the State Airport Development Program. This program also receives funding from the aviation fuel excise taxes collected around the state. These excise taxes accrue during the state fiscal year, and NDOT is now requesting the available revenue of $1.9 million. NDOT works diligently to prepare a 5-year comprehensive capital improvement program partnership with the FAA for Indiana State Aviation System Plan airports. The current plan forecasts a statewide matching grant need, a goal of 5%, which we established in our office. It's approximately $2.7 million to $3.5 million per year for the next 2 years. Indiana's airports are required to submit their 5-year capital improvement plan to the NDOT Office of Aviation each February. Each airport's plan includes a wide variety of projects that are important to the airport. The FAA utilizes the National Priority Rating System to scrutinize and range each project based upon impacts to safety, obstructions, and capacity enhancements. NDOT and the FAA are required to trim this program down to the required funding target levels established by Congress, where the highest priority projects receive the limited funding around the nation. NDOT and the FAA work together and approve each project for Indiana, which is recommended for application for federal and state grants.
Thank you. You don't do any evaluation whether there's a nearby airport project, whether 2 projects are competing, or whether there's a need for all these projects within a service area?
So the projects are ranked in the National Priority Rating System. It's a federal program.
A national?
It's a national priority rating system nationwide, so each project for each airport goes up against projects all over the place. So if there's 2 airports competing for the same, the same type of project in Indiana, it depends on what the scope of that project is and not necessarily where the airport is located. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Allison Taylor. I am the Medicaid Director for the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning, and I have a handful of items on the agenda for you regarding our state plan amendment and waiver efforts. So if it's okay, I'll just start and run through those. The first one is a waiver amendment to our age and disabled waiver. So we are seeking amendment from the federal government to expand access to home and community-based services by expanding capacity by 4,500 in year 1 up to 13,000 additional slots in year 5, and there is no fiscal impact.
I think we're asking the same question. Go ahead, Senator.
How is it that there's no fiscal impact?
Well, so the notion of foregoing that institutional level, obviously for the home and community base, it's not a one-to-one match. So for purposes of trying to quantify for the budget committee, it is budget neutral until we really drill down on the results of it, if that makes sense. If you need additional information, we can certainly, these are definitely conversations we have with fiscal team members to talk through, the nuance there.
I want to go further with that.
Sure.
The aged and disabled waiver program that you have
right
pays providers to come into people's homes and provide services, right?
Right.
And that's the savings that you're going to realize from them being in I want to call it a nursing home or institution facility.
Yeah, so there is a difference in cost, right?
All right.
Yeah.
The question I have for you is that the provider rates of reimbursement have not gone up, I think, in like 2 or 3 years. Are you increasing provider reimbursement rates under this one?
That's a great question. So they're two separate things, but our office is currently evaluating HCBS payment rate and methodology. So there is there are multiple kind of facets to home and community-based services. I think expanding waiver slots is certainly one, looking at reimbursement, all options sort of on the table in terms of FSSA and industry trying to invest in home and community-based services. So I think you're asking just the right questions. So that is a part of the evaluation. This piece in particular is simply the mechanics of expanding the waiver slots, though.
So you expanded the program, but you could have increased the rates too, the reimbursement. You could.
I think that's outside
Okay.
of this, but
All
we
right.
can definitely talk about that. I can
Okay.
give you an update. Thank you.
Thank you.
You ready? Okay. So the next amendment we are pursuing through our state plan, and that is a change in the reimbursement methodology for durable and home health medical equipment and supplies. So this new methodology is based on 100% of the Medicare fee schedule. I do want to say that this is a result of the 21st Century Cures Act is a part of the catalyst to this. However, we also believe that moving to the Medicare fee schedule fits in the spirit of increased transparency and predictability in rate payment and methodology. So want to present that with you. There is a small fiscal impact as you can see in your materials. Okay. I will move on to tell you about a state plan amendment that we're pursuing in the Vaccines for Children program. So the VFC, as we call it, is a program funded by the CDC and run out of the Indiana State Department of Health that provides vaccines at no cost to children who would otherwise go unvaccinated due to inability to pay. So physicians' offices, community health centers, public health clinics enroll with ISDH as VFC providers, and Medicaid pays an administrative fee for vaccines that are given. Currently, Indiana is among the lowest in terms of payment for these administrative fees in our part of the country, and so we are increasing that to $15 to more closely align with our neighbors and hopefully encourage increased vaccination rates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is our vaccination rate among the population that would be eligible for this? Do you know? And if you don't, you can get it to me.
Shoot, that's a great question. I'll follow up with you. I should have done that pre-work.
Go.
No problem.
I did have one more question, and then can find out. I'm also wondering, since this same population would probably be served by newborn screening and things, if you can also get me in the follow-up on how we follow up with newborns to make sure that those are Medicaid eligible, et cetera, are actually coming back and getting their vaccinations.
Okay, great. I might follow up with you to clarify the question. Thank you. So I will move on to an amendment that we are making to our family supports waiver. So this amendment actually is the result of state legislation from this past year, which our FSW, it's a waiver to provide priority status on the waiver for children of either active members or veterans of the Armed Forces of the United States or the National Guard. This is effective October 1st, 2019, and there is no fiscal impact. Okay, so moving along to our 1959 state plan benefit. So we're seeking to amend our child mental health wraparound state plan benefit to allow advanced practice nurses to supervise wraparound facilitators and remove provider requirements for a letter from a local system of care. The idea here is to attract additional providers to the care team featuring some multidisciplinary experiences such as child welfare, juvenile justice, education. There is no fiscal impact and effective of November 1st, 2019.
Thank you. Again, if you don't have it, but I'd like to know how we're going to follow up, because this is pretty broad what we're doing. We're trying to get these children some care, and we know that there's a limited number of people built right now with the ability to do it, but it's pretty broad what we're letting them do, and also having the A&Ps cover them, or APN. So if you could just follow up with me on how we're tracking to make sure that they're actually getting the care they need and how effective this broader program is. Thanks.
Will do. Thank you. Okay. So next, we are pursuing an amendment to the Healthy Indiana Plan waiver to create a workforce bridge account. So this will provide $1,000 of support for HIP members who become ineligible for the program due to an increase in income. That kind of combines nicely with our Gateway to Work community engagement program. So this is an effort to address the cliff effect and remove or limit barriers that can come with transitioning to commercial coverage. There is a fiscal impact, annual fiscal impact of $2.6 million in state funds, and the bridge will be effective April 1st, 2020.
You know, Allison, I think this is a great idea because too often folks are offered a job and they can't afford to take it because their insurance premium goes up, or they're offered a promotion and they can't take it. So this gives them time to react to those increases, I think. So, questions? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I think it's great. I've heard this from employers that they'd like people to work more. But I just have one question. Probably won't happen, but if, for example, someone, if they're a student, single mom student, and all of a sudden, you know, they've got a great job, is there any income limit for that bridge? No.
There's no. Okay, and then finally, we are pursuing, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got excited.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Taylor, the $1,000, and then you say the fiscal impact is going to be 2.6 million, so 260 people, right?
I'm sorry, what?
26,000 people.
We think 27,000 individuals a year will be impacted by this.
So in saying that, this HIP bridge, this waiver for working waiver, let me just make sure I understand this.
Mm-hmm.
Did you expect 27,000 people to not go out and get a job or get some kind of work requirement that we require?
So the 27,000 are those individuals that we believe will income out of HIP. So they are going to be individuals that have taken advantage of different education training opportunities, connected with career counselors, have that option to take that job. And this is meant to be a tool or resource so they don't have to make that tough decision to stay with addiction treatment or whatever kind of that healthcare need they have versus that leap to commercial or employer coverage. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that's the idea.
You did answer the question, and so that number is what percentage of the total?
I'm sorry, say that again?
The total number of HIP waiver clients.
Right.
What percentage what does 27,000 as a percentage?
It's of about 70 to 80,000 in that Gateway to Work bucket. So we think that about 27,000 of those will potentially income out. And so this bridge is there to help them.
So 70,000, 80,000 people that go into the bridge to work will income out. The other ones won't.
They may not. So this is based on, prior, there's some forecasting that goes into that. We're trying to be
we can look at that when we get it.
We'll evaluate closely for sure.
We'll evaluate it closer. I'm just hesitant to say this was a good thing until we see what happens and how many people actually wait, because I think it's going to be a lot less, but I could be wrong.
We'll keep a dialogue about that for sure. Sure. Okay.
And I just want to make sure, so you have 22 million for the federal government, 21, and 2.4 for the state. So is this program contingent upon the federal funding?
So I have to go back and check. The expectation here in the conversations with CMS is that this is within Healthy Indiana Plan, and it is a 90-10 match, so it would be the 2.6.
But if they don't, then we're not on the hook for the other 22 million.
No, we'll definitely have conversations if we don't expect it to go that way.
Kind of increase in federal funding, because instead of the 1/3, 2/3, it looks like the federal portion is greater.
It is. So with this population within HIP, it is a 90-10 match. So that's why it's not that traditional state match that you're familiar with some of the other programs.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? All right. Continue.
Okay. And finally, we are pursuing an amendment to our state plan to modernize the value-based purchasing program that we have with nursing facilities to be more focused on patient outcomes, staffing, and other regulatory aspects. So this is budget neutral.
Questions? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next is NICTE. Dan, are you opening this up, or?
I believe Mr. Hanna is.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your time. Good afternoon. Being that it is afternoon, we'll be as quick as we can be. We are here in front of you today to get a review of the Westlake updates in the financing plan, present the financing plan for review for double track project and updates to the governance agreements between the IFA, the RDA, and NICTE, as well as review of the FTA grants. As a reminder, this is really about the economic development aspects of this, about 1,000 construction jobs, 6,000 permanent full-time jobs. We're making a lot of progress, and we're enjoying continued support in a bipartisan way, not only here, but up in Northwest Indiana. And finally, thank you so much for your continued support for these projects. Without you, of course, they would not be happening. With that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mike Nolan to continue with the review. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill, and thank you to the committee as well. Quickly, the Westlake project, as many of you know, is a 9-mile or 8-mile extension off our main line from Hammond down to the Munster-Dyer border. 4 new stations, elevated structure. It has a gateway station that connects both the South Shore and Westlake service together. Back in the last August, the State Budget Committee approved the financing plan for Westlake. We submitted to the federal government in September of 18. We've revised our cost budget in compliance with discussions with the FTA. In March of this year, we received a medium-high rating on Westlake, which allows us to advance in the federal process. And we expect to get into engineering for Westlake, which is a phase of their full funding grant agreement process, here in the next month or so. For the double track project, it is a 25-mile project between Gary, Indiana and Michigan City. It involves double tracking much territory that is single track territory today. We're building high-level platforms that will speed up ridership and increase accessibility for our riders. It's intended to open up the operations of the South Shore, greater frequency, lower times to market, and grow ridership. The process, as Bill mentioned, is to get the financing plan approved and then off to the FTA so we can submit to get into engineering with the FTA's process. We hope to be in the engineering phase in November of this year with a project rating at the same time. And so that's a brief update on where we are with the projects, and turn it over to Dan on the team structure side.
Thank you, Mike. Real quick on slide, we should probably be advancing these slides though, shouldn't we? There we go. Slide 6 just walks through the 3 entities that are involved in the project. I won't go through all the bullet points. The RDA is the chief fiscal officer for the project. They are in charge of the transit-oriented development once the projects are completed. They are providing local funding for the project and do have oversight of the project. NICTE, or the South Shore Railroad, is the owner and operator of the rail. They are the applicant for the project. They're also responsible for the procurement of the project and have to work closely with the RDA and the IFA on that procurement process. And the IFA will be issuing the debt
both from the RDA perspective. They'll issue RDA bonds through the IFA, and then also state appropriation-backed bonds. And we report directly to OMB. We also have a project oversight role, and our own. Each group has their own advisory team. Real quickly on the governance agreement on the next slide, it outlines the roles and responsibilities of each agency. The FTA really needed kind of an explanation of that. They're used to seeing kind of a one entity applying for grant dollars like this, and we have kind of a three-legged stool. So the governance agreement really lets them know how we work together and so forth. It helps ensure that we're making decisions in a coordinated manner. It also focuses more importantly on cost containment, on-time project schedule, meeting the FTA grant requirements. It also enhances the funding and financing commitments, protects us against cost overruns. Next slide. Briefly is the project funding overview. Those boxes you see on top in the darker blue are the various means we're going to pay for the project. The RDA will issue bonds through the IFA. The state will issue its own state appropriation-backed bonds that were approved by statute. There will be some grant anticipation notes we need to issue in advance of receiving our federal FTA funds, as much as we'd like the federal government to give us that money at the beginning of the project and allow us to spend it. The way the FTA works is you'll get approved and you'll get that money over the course of 3 to 7 years, not just during the construction period. So we'll need some type of grant anticipation notes. Those are enhanced by the Next Generation Trust Fund. When we have to issue those grant anticipation notes, there is a backstop on those notes through the Next Generation Trust Fund. The lighter blue boxes on the bottom show kind of the flow of funds as to repay the bonds. So you'll have local cash contributions from St. Joe, or local cash contributions from RDA members, RDA revenues from the membership dues, state appropriations to repay the bonds. Then there'll be FTA grants that will flow to NICD. Those will go to work to pay for the project. In addition, you see that box off to the right-hand side, which is the Next Level Connections Fund. During this last legislative session, in discussions with the FTA, we determined they kind of changed their model from a 49% match to a 38% match. That was mentioned when we got our medium-high rating. About 2 weeks later, they awarded their full funding grant agreements for about $4.5 billion worth of projects. It was $1.7 billion of full funding grant agreements, so right at that 38% threshold. So that caused us kind of have to redo the model there, and thankfully, due to hard work by legislators, we were able to find some additional funding to fill that gap. So that's kind of a general funding overview. If you go to the next slide, kind of gives you just brass tacks of how double track will be paid for. RDA will be contributing $36.5 million. The local cash contributions are coming from LaPorte and St. Joe County, $8.25 million each. So you notice the 4 counties that are involved in the double track project. You've got Lake and Porter as part of the RDA putting in $36.5 million, St. Joe County, 8.25, and LaPorte County, 8.25. So they all have an even amount of funding for the project. There was a small amount of money that was put in at the beginning of the project. I believe one of the members asked a question about this. $3.2 million is there was some need for some funding up front for consultants, and each county threw in $800,000 to fund that cost of getting some consultants on board early for the planning stages of double track. State of Indiana will be putting in between cash and bonding about $179 million, and the FTA match will be about $161 million, and that gets us to the total project cost of $416. Is there a question brewing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I meant to ask a question back on slide number 6, but my question is in general. The board that we used to have is now a lot smaller.
That would be correct.
It's gone from our perspective, from an inclusive board to a kind of exclusive board with, political appointments. Has that been done yet? Are the appointments there yet?
Yeah, the appointments have been made.
They've been made. The political appointments have been made.
Correct, and they had their first meeting this morning, and actually approved this project this morning prior to this meeting.
Approve it. So, Mr. Chairman, is there, can you tell us who is on that?
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Nolan, they're Mr. Nolan's board members, I'll let him tell you.
On that exclusive board?
Thank you, Representative. The chairman is the Commissioner of the Indiana Department of Transportation. Our new chairman is Joe McGinnis. From St. Joseph County, we have Commissioner Andy Costelny, who was a former board member of the old NICD board, and he's on the new NICD board. So we've got transition history there. From LaPorte, we have Mayor Ron Meir. From the county of Porter, we have Jeff Good. And then from Lake County, we have Mayor Freeman Wilson.
The next 3 weeks, okay.
All right, so get back to the right slide. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. It's good to see this project moving along, and am I correct to understand that what you're asking for today is you're showing us the change in the Westlake, but you're also asking that we give you final approval on the double track, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we've already had an initial review of Westlake.
Yeah, right,
It was
we
done
did that last year.
We're coming back because obviously there have been some shift in cost because of the FTA changes. So we're coming back for a second review of Westlake, a first review of double track and approval of these numbers, and then also seeking a review of the FTA grant dollars. There was some legislation passed that requires us to get reviews done of any major lump sum payments to the state of Indiana or the IFA.
Oh, I don't remember that, but okay. Let me ask you this. Is there any movement do you see any possibility that this 38% funding level will go back up?
I think we have not seen anything from our contacts there. I know Mr. Hanna and Mr. Nolan have talked to their lobbyists as we have with ours. Right now, we're not seeing any signs of that. That doesn't mean things can shift. And if they do shift and say we get 40%, there would be less state dollars that would be used if that would happen, absolutely.
All right, but we haven't seen any of that. I know I've heard from the Congressman Visklosky that, that they're very unhappy with this shift down.
Yeah, I think there have been legislators on the Hill expressing their discontent with the matching kind of being down at this level. Unfortunately, the only thing we have right now as a predictor for that is the ones that got approved in late March, the $4.5 billion at the $1.7 billion. So I would love to see that go up. I think our team is trying to monitor that and see if we can make that happen, especially through Representative Visklosky, who right now is playing an important role on this on the Hill.
Okay, and if I can just make one little comment here on the side. I know that the legislation called for INDOT to be one of the members of the board, but frankly, INDOT's never run railroads. I thought it should have been you.
Greatly appreciated, Senator Italian, but I'm glad that Commissioner McGinnis is leading the charge on that.
Dan, as the percentage has changed here, so originally it was 51% federal.
Now, 49% Fed, 51% local and state.
Okay, and say it was
the original modeling we did.
Yep.
And what we had seen in the past, the FTA was matching at 49% of the project cost, and then the state and local had to be at 51%.
Okay, so the federal their share went down to 38%.
Correct.
That switch, did the state pick up that entire increase? The local share didn't increase.
Correct.
At all
That is correct, Zach. Okay. Excuse me, State Budget Director Jackson. I got used to saying that. I think my part on double track is done. I'll let Mike kind of give you a little more background on the project.
Sure. A little more in-depth history. This has been progressing for some time. We started in one category in discussions with the FTA and their funding. FTA suggested that we move into a different category, which is their New Starts program. That's what we're working on now. That's what we're about to submit to get into their engineering phase. We are done with all the environmental. This is in a highly sensitive environmental area right next to the state park and now the national park. So we've accomplished the environmental. We had a substantial three-party agreement with South Shore Freight, our freight partner, and NIPSCO. We've accomplished that. We were able to get an agreement with Metro in Chicago where we run on our last 14 miles, and it's imperative that they let us run additional traffic. That agreement has been passed. As Dan mentioned, the NICD board today approved, the last of the 3 boards approved the governance agreement and recommended that we advance forward to submit to the federal government. I should note, again, thank you to the state and to the governor for pushing for the extra $205 million. I was just at a meeting with my other commuter rail properties around the country to be able to tell them that we reacted that fast was remarkable to everyone else in the country. So kudos to the state of Indiana. And we hope to get a entry into engineering here, submit to the federal government in June. Actually the end of this week is when we'll submit to the FTA. The next steps, you see the box, if you can move that slide, Dan, a couple forward. The check boxes are the ones that have already taken place. I just mentioned the NICD board approved the plan today. We're before you, which is the next important item, so that the FTA knows that our funds are committed. That's all important to them. We expect to receive our rating and entry in engineering in November. We would then go into final engineering. This will be design bid build on this project. It's not mentioned here, but our anticipated target for a full funding grant agreement is in May of '21, and revenue service is our goal of fall of 2023. Next slide, please, Dan, if you want to talk about that one.
Senator Talley mentioned we are coming back to the Budget Committee for a review of Westlake also, and the different funding options, funding that will be needed there. This is necessary because of the shift in FTA funding from the 49% to the 38%. Again, really quickly, the RDA will be funding through cash and bonds about $266 million. The state of Indiana, $226 million. And the FTA, $324 million for $816 million of project cost. That's kind of updated numbers on Westlake.
Dan, can you tell me where you baked in the extra 180 that when we went from the 59 to 38, where is that number, that 180 coming into the state? Is it on the Westlake? Is it in the double
mixture.
tracking?
It's a mixture on both projects,
Break
Senator
that
Mishler.
down for us? Is there
I
a way
would
to-
say ballpark about 100 and, in this model, we've actually shown the full 205 just in case we're showing everything.
Just break down the 205.
Yeah, I would say we're probably about 130 on double track and maybe 85, 130 to 135 on Westlake, and then about 70 to around 70 million on double track.
All right, thank you.
Our goal is, again, not to utilize that full 205, but we did bake it into the modeling. We thought it was appropriate.
I was just trying to figure out where it was.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan. Quickly, background on Westlake, where we've been. We submitted initially in the fall of '17. FTA asked for some additional feedback on the finance plan that was shored up, again, as I mentioned, before the State Budget Committee last August. We've also had a number of legislative enhancements to secure the revenue, both Bill's lit revenue and some other pledges that have been made. Again, on Westlake, we're through the environmental process. It was a full-blown environmental impact statement. We submitted, as I mentioned, to the FTA in the fall, and we got our medium-high rating. We have also been able to secure some of our long lead time items. The FTA approved that. I just mentioned there, Toshiba propulsion for our rail cars is essential, and the FTA approved us to lock into that. Metro agreed to allow us to run the trains for Westlake, so that was important. This is going to be design build, and we received 3 proposals from major design build joint ventures. The NICD board approved moving those 3 firms into a request for qualifications at this board meeting today. The 3 firms are Walsh, Herzog team, the Kiewit team, and the Passion Ragnar Benson team. So we're pleased that we've got some major players here who are competing for this work. It'll be good for, I think, to help, as Dan mentioned, to keep the competition going and price as competitive as we can possibly have it. Again, thank you for the extra funding that pushed us to, in the FTA's eyes. It met their thresholds and been very well received by the FTA. We're now at $816 million for Westlake. That includes a 34% contingency. So we don't expect to spend all of that money. We probably would carry a 15 to 20% contingency if this was state money. The feds have a lot of extra contingency. They're very risk adverse. So we were able to respond to that. As Dan mentioned, we hope not to use all that 205. And then, as I mentioned, finally, we're going to move on the 3 firms to RFP stage. Get that next slide there, Dan. Yep. The check boxes are all done, as I mentioned. The one that's not checked, we just checked it this morning with the new NICD board. We are finishing up our technical provisions. We'll issue an RFP here in the next couple weeks. We expect our proposals in December. We are targeting a full funding grant agreement from the federal government in the second quarter of next year, which we would then immediately give a notice to proceed to the design build firm, and we hope to get into revenue service in the fall of 2024. And now I can turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Mike. So the last thing we wanted to cover is just a quick update on TDDs, or Transit Development Districts. This is important. So what we're doing here today really with these packages and financing and updates is becoming as competitive as we can on a national level. There are other projects in the Hopper FTA evaluates, and we feel that this will put us in the strongest position to be successful. The other thing that they're looking at more and more from the White House perspective is the economic development impacts. And fortunately, as prescribed by law by you all a few years ago, we have these development districts that lay over every station in the system, both on the new line and the existing line. And what they do is allow the RDA to capture the increment within those districts for both property tax and income tax, and then reinvest it in that same district for development around the station, which is more popularly called transit-oriented development. So we've been working with the communities, put together an advisory committee as prescribed by statute, and we're starting to make some progress in terms of concept planning and drawing the districts. And so we'll be doing that over the next coming months in order to develop that return on investment that we've promised the state of Indiana that we would deliver on. And again, also to be competitive on the national level. It is a unique aspect that this project has to Indiana, which is different than the others that are being presented, and we think presents a real advantage to us. So, we were available for questions, obviously, at this point, of course, and thank you for your time.
If I could just say one additional thing. I'm not going to be at your budget committee meeting in July. I don't know if Mr. Reynolds will be there, but I know he's departing, and I wanted to say what a pleasure it's been working with him over the years in his different roles here in State Budget Committee, City Controller's Office, and currently his current role, and appreciate all the hard work we've been able to do together and so forth, David. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Talion?
Yes.
Representative Brown?
Yes.
Director Jackson?
Yes.
Yeah, Representative Hamilton?
Yes.
Chairman Mishler?
Yes.
5-0.
5-0. All right, next up. Court.
Thank you all for having me here today. I'm Courtney Scoffsma. I'm the Executive Director of the Distress Unit Appeal Board. I am here today to provide you with an update on where things stand with the school corporation fiscal indicators. As you may recall, I was before you in October of last year. At that time, we had 8 proposed indicators, and we brought those to you for review. After you all completed your process, the School Corporation Fiscal and Qualitative Indicators Committee met again in December to finalize those 8 indicators. And we then released the indicators for all 289 school corporations on December 31st. Those are publicly available out on the DUAB webpage. So if you have not already looked at those, I would highly encourage you to do so. My intent of being here today is to provide you an update of where we have been since that time. Really, since the start of the year, one of the key tasks that I have been involved in has been reviewing the indicators for each of those school corporations and ultimately making a recommendation to the Distressed Unit Appeal Board on which school corporations may warrant additional review. So I did provide a report to DUAB at the end of May, and DUAB is currently in the process of reviewing those recommendations. We are not at a point yet where we have those final DUAB determinations available just yet. For the purposes of the report that I did provide to you, what I walked through were the 8 different indicators and tried to provide some insight into how we evaluated those indicators when we were trying to identify what category we would place the various school corporations in. As you have likely seen, we ultimately came up with 3 different categories that we are looking at. The first one is the assessment category. This would be the category where the school corporations that we want to talk to further. Those are the school corporations we will be reaching out to once DUAB has made its final determinations. I also have provided in the report a draft of the template that we would be utilizing for that assessment process. It looks very much like a form, but it's more of just a tool to help to guide that conversation. As you'll also notice, it's fairly comprehensive. Not every school corporation would necessarily go through that entire template. It really will be targeted based on the needs of a particular school corporation. After we have the assessment category, the next category we have is an observation category. The observation category, we do not anticipate reaching out to those particular school corporations. Rather, we are using that to kind of guide our next round of review. So the indicators process is an ongoing process. We will release year 2 of the indicators later this year. And the schools that are falling into that observation category will be top of our list for those that we want to go back and look at further. So they are showing some warning signs, but not enough that at this point in time we feel like we need to go and speak with them further. The last category then is just a no action category. These are school corporations that at this time we don't feel like we need to go and speak with further. In terms of the indicators themselves, I'll highlight 5 specific indicators. While we have 8 in total, ultimately 5 really help to drive a lot of the review. The top 2 would be enrollment, or ADM, and fund balance as percent of expenditures. In both of those cases, I've provided a few different charts within the report to give you a general feel for how we would evaluate those indicators. Those charts are general in nature. You may notice they don't have really any X or Y variables on there, and that was intentional. In preparing this report, I did want to ensure that we were following the statutory non-disclosure requirements. And also, it's really important to not just look at one individual indicator for a school corporation, but rather look at all of the indicators together to get a complete picture of that school corporation. So in the case of, I'll just walk you through quickly the case of ADM. So if you look at chart 1 in the report that was provided, you'll see there that we have a situation where as ADM is bigger, even if we are seeing some declines in ADM, a larger school corporation may be better suited to be able to absorb the impact of that decreasing enrollment. Whereas a smaller school corporation may have a more sensitive threshold where we would want to go in sooner rather than later to talk to them about how they are responding to that change in enrollment. Some of the, well, actually, for both ADM and for fund balance as percent of expenditures, in both of those cases, we intentionally evaluated those over both a long-term perspective and a short-term perspective. The indicators themselves include data from 2010 through 2017. In the case of ADM, we also have 2018 data on there as well. So for these, we did look both at what has been occurring over time, but also wanted to isolate what has just occurred within the last couple of years. In some of these cases, if they've just recently seen a decline in enrollment or a significant decline in fund balances, they may not have been able to fully adjust to that new situation. So we wanted to understand where they stood today. Some of the other indicators I'll highlight, first would be tuition support per ADM as compared to general fund expenditures per ADM. This one was used as a gauge to see if the school corporation has been regularly overspending one of its primary revenue sources within the general fund. If we do have a school corporation that's in that situation, they may be more likely to face financial difficulties moving forward. Next, we have operating referendum as a percent of total revenue. In this case, what we are looking at would be the amount of revenue that they are bringing in through their operating referendum as compared to their total revenue. We would be looking at school corporations here that either have a very heavy dependence on an operating referendum, or also looking at situations where the operating referendum may be going away within the next couple of years. That may be a situation where we want to be proactive and still go and speak with that school corporation to understand what their plans are. Are they going to be pursuing another referendum, or how will they adjust to that change in revenue? The last indicator that I'll highlight here is general fund salaries and benefits as percent of general fund expenditures. This is an indicator that actually can go both ways in terms of if it is on the lower end of the scale. What that could mean would be that there are revenue challenges within operational funds, and the school corporation is having to include more operational expenditures within their general fund. On the other side, if that percentage is significantly high, if it's up 95, 96%, you may have a situation where that school corporation does not have as much flexibility as they may need within their general fund. So as we looked at all of these different indicators, I've also included in your report just a few different examples of ways that we would try to aggregate all 8 different indicators and create that picture of what a school corporation may look like and whether or not we would want to go and talk to them further. In terms of next steps, kind of to let you know where we are headed from here, as I said, DUAB is currently working through the process of reviewing my recommendations. They ultimately will provide the determination of which school corporations we will go and speak with through the assessment process. So I would anticipate that assessment process will start hopefully next month. That's my plan, is to start to reach out to school corporations as soon as we have those determinations. The assessment process would be done in person. I want to be there and meet with these school officials to really get a good feel for what's going on at their school. Once we've conducted the assessment, then I would bring the results of those assessments back to DUAB, and DUAB will utilize the results of the assessment to determine whether or not a corrective action plan is necessary. That would move us into a whole another process with those school corporations, where the school corporations have to prepare the corrective action plan, and then DUAB will continue to assist them and oversee the implementation of that corrective action plan over time until hopefully we arrive at a place where they have successfully met some predetermined goals that we would have established at the start of that plan. While all of that is going on based on year 1 of the indicators, we also are going to be starting the process of moving towards year 2 of the indicators. We will reconvene the School Corporation Fiscal and Qualitative Indicators Committee later this year, probably August, September timeframe would be the start of that. I want to make sure that we've had a few assessments under our belts to assist in validating whether or not these indicators were the appropriate indicators. The committee will meet to determine whether or not we should make any changes to the indicators. If there are changes to the indicators, that would be brought back before you all for review prior to making those changes. And then my hope would be that we have the second round of indicators available late this fall, early winter. November, early December timeframe is what I'm targeting for actually releasing year 2 of the indicators. So I'm happy to answer questions on where we stand today and where we are headed.
First of all, I just want to say, I've worked with you, I've served on DUAB with you, and I think you've done an excellent job.
Great.
So,
thank you.
Any questions? Senator Talley.
When do you expect, is this an ongoing process, or do you expect to evaluate every school corporation? What's your next plan?
Sure. This absolutely is an ongoing process. The release of the indicators is required to occur on an annual basis. And so the way I see this playing out is each year we will identify a set of schools that we'll go in and we'll speak with. And then as some of those schools may enter into corrective action plan, then certainly as we release the next round of indicators, we would know we're already working actively with that school. So then that would free up for the next round that there would be other school corporations that we could continue to review. Now, in terms of whether or not we ever end up doing an assessment for all school corporations, that I don't know. I don't know if we would get to that point, because it really will be driven by those that we think we need to understand their situation further. One of the things, though, that we are doing is this draft of the assessment template. One of my goals is to make that publicly available. So even those school corporations that may not be going through the assessment process with DUAB, they can sit down themselves and walk through that process locally if they would like to, and at least ask themselves similar questions to what we would be asking. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. When do you suspect that these names will be illuminated to the public? When will you start doing that process?
So the process itself actually provides for some non-disclosure of these names. The intent here is not to create additional challenges for these school corporations. So the process itself will actually not be a public process until there's a point in time where it could go public. And what that would mean is the school corporation goes all the way through the assessment process. They either are asked to do the corrective action plan and they say that they are not going to. That could place them onto what's called the watch list. It's in statute as the watch list. So they either choose not to do a corrective action plan, or they do a corrective action plan with DUAB, but they do not implement that plan as designed. In that case, I would go back to them, work with them to try to get them back on track. If they still continue to stay off of their corrective action plan, then at that point, DUAB could determine to move them to the watch list as well. If they move to the watch list, first that would come back to State Budget Committee for review prior to being finalized. And then at that point, everything that had transpired to that date would become publicly available.
So how, Mr. Chairman, also, so what is the time frame in regards to that whole process occurring?
That could be several years from now, to be honest. There is no time frame on the corrective action plan process. The statute simply calls for us to work with the school corporations for as long as it takes to try to turn them around. So that there's no time frame on that.
And you don't think there'll be any leaks on that?
I'm hoping not.
You're hoping. We all have hope and aspirations. Okay, but I think that would occur. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So the next item here is something, there was a lot of discussion about the increases in tuition. And so in those discussions, we decided that it would be a good idea to have those schools, those universities that went above the CHE recommendation to come in and answer questions from the committee. So I guess I'll start off with any committee discussion before I start calling in the universities. Representative Brown?
Senator Mishler, I think we did some analysis where there's been higher than inflation and higher than personal income growth, and so therefore tuition is taking a higher percent of a Hoosier citizen's salary, around 14.5% of their salary tuition is. And just wondering what is the affordability and accessibility as we go forward. And I think that's why we're seeing more debt to students coming out, is the great increase over the last 10 years of tuition relative to personal income.
Ivy Tech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, fiscal staff. I'm Matt Hawkins. Some of you may remember me as a CFO from the commission and a mentee of Commissioner Lubbers. So we take seriously at Ivy Tech the commission's recommendation. The commission's been focused for many years on creating a sustainable, stable, predictable funding model for higher education. So based on the predictability of that, over a year ago when we were creating our fiscal 19 budget internally, we created a salary plan that had no recurring salary increases for anyone that made over $30,000. We've cut our retirement contribution for the second time in 5 years for new hires. Since January of 2018, we've closed 28 programs and suspended 37. And since President Ellspermann took office, we have reduced our footprint by about 600,000 square feet. We have two funding sources at Ivy Tech that make up 97% of our operating budget. That's state funding at about 55%, and then tuition dollars at 43%. When you combine the state operating dollars in fiscal 20 with the tuition increase of 3%, our overall budget will increase by 0.94%. I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you for being here. The question that I have is, you're going to 3.06%, and I fired back a email to you guys asking that was higher than inflation. But in regards to the dual credit, going from like $50 down to $45, or $40 rather, what impact does that have on you in regards to your impact of fiscal? Does that contribute to the 3.06% increase because of that $10?
It did affect us. The state, taking it from $50 to $40, but the state did roll forward the number of credit hours. So Ivy Tech produced more dual credit hours and was paid at that $40 rate. So we received a real increase of about $500,000 because of that. But if it was paid at the $50, we would have received $3.2 million more dollars per year, so about $6.4 million over the biennium. And those dollars are allocated predominantly out to campuses based on internal metrics to increase enrollment and other innovative things.
So if you would have kept it at $50, if the state would have kept it at $50, you would have got about $3.6 million versus the $500,000
Correct.
you're getting now.
Correct.
So that's essentially a $3.1 million swing.
Yes, correct.
And your tuition's going up, like I said, to help maybe balance some of that lost revenue?
Yes. Overall, the budget is affected by that, yes.
So another shift. Okay.
And we are the only school that still does not charge for dual credit.
Representative Brown.
Thank you. You talked about reducing your footprint. How did you reduce your footprint?
So I have a list that I can provide you. We've canceled leases and we've sold numerous buildings in numerous locations that total 600,000, just under 600,000 since 2016 when President Ellspermann took office.
Have you decreased employees?
Yes. Some of those locations, the instructors and programs would go to other locations that are nearby in the same service area, and others, the programs closed with the location.
You are a institution of acceptance of everybody.
Yes.
Do you need that going forward, or should there be some restriction so that you can manage numbers better?
I think a big part of our mission is being open access. I personally think we should stay open access, and we should be able to manage that internally.
For somebody who's not qualified?
We're the entry point of public higher ed in Indiana. Even if they aren't necessarily qualified by a certain standard, they have to essentially enter with us because we're open access. We're the only school that you don't have to fill out a FAFSA to start. So sometimes just getting one class under your belt and then moving forward is helpful.
Okay. Are you continuing to look at closing campuses?
Yes, President Ellspermann will say 1 million square feet is the reduction goal, so we're working towards that.
One thing I'll bring up is, you guys were in my office on this free tuition for volunteer firemen, and you claim you had the ability to cover that free tuition. And so that concerns me that now you're raising your tuition because you say you have a shortfall. So my concern was all along, with this free tuition for volunteer firemen, were you going to do it on the backs of other students paying tuition? Because if you had the available money for that, how now do you not have the availability of the money to cover your shortfall?
So that program, and when we said that to you, isn't into perpetuity, really. And the idea behind that was that we've changed retirement programs numerous times now. We have 4 active plans. So going into next year, we believe our perf liability will be reduced by the amount that we can cover that with in a one-time way during this biennium.
Thank you. I think you said you get 45% of your money from tuition and 55% performance funding from the state. How do you charge fees for any of the multitude of things that other campuses charge?
So we have one fee, a technology fee, that's $75 per semester. If in our budget book, when our board votes on our tuition, you'll see the word fee where it says R&R fee or a parking fee that covers our parking lots, but they're not actually fees. It's taken out of the credit hour charge, and it's an internal allocation. So we only have one mandatory fee, technology.
Okay, so if I look at your tuition, what I see is what I really pay.
Yes.
Okay. And so as to Ivy Tech with the performance funding, I'm assuming, and I've seen this since I've been here, since they created this, that every school loses something. There's a loss to somebody on the performance funding. Where is yours?
Well, I would say our loss is in workforce, because workforce is a big part of our mission, and it's not in the performance model. So only anything that CTs, TCs, and associate degrees, starting with those that are at least 18 credit hours, are included in the performance model. So having a large part of our business function being workforce and that not being part of the model would probably be a loss. This time, the one thing that we couldn't accurately predict is a change in classification of instructional programs. The stackable credentials, when they were stacked within 1 year in the past, the state paid for those, and now it is only the highest in that zip code within a given fiscal year. And we totally agree with the policy, but when the decision was made, the data was already set, so there wasn't really anything we could do to correct any of that in the model.
And then one final question. Do you see a connection between your bond ratings and tuition?
Yes, I do, and
state funding.
And I actually spend a lot of time thinking about this. And when we talk about reserves, Ivy Tech doesn't have a lot of reserves necessarily like other schools or endowments, things like that. So our bond rating is the second highest compared to IU Bloomington and Purdue West Lafayette. And all of our debt at Ivy Tech is paid for by the state. So that AA bond rating with S&P and Fitch is very important. And when they review our bond rating, they come in, and one of the main things they're looking at is stability. And the state has always been very good at funding Ivy Tech in an extremely stable way. So when we look at tuition, we're trying to keep it as low as possible, but with the fiscal 20 state appropriation going down, we're just trying to keep everything as stable as possible for that debt load, which is about $250 million of debt that the state pays for.
Thank you.
Representative Porter?
I need to follow up. Okay, and I was thinking about Chairman Brown tweaked my brain because you utilized the word qualified. Doesn't Ivy Tech do they have open admission?
Yes.
For the most part. So anybody who's in the state of Indiana, who's a Hoosier, who want to go there, they're qualified to go, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have throwaway students, right?
No.
Okay, not in our institution. You had a program that you had tried to find to help those students, called All Access or All Students Achieve.
All Students Achieve, yes.
We didn't fund that, right?
Right.
Right, and that would have been toward disadvantaged students to help them navigate the process and matriculate on to maybe a four-year institution or wherever here, right?
Yes, that line item was comprised of scaling 8-week courses, college coaches, Latinx recruitment, retention, diversity supplier engagement, cultural sensitivity and implicit bias training, and about $1 million a year was for security and single access because some campuses can't lock down immediately, so it was door access as well.
So all those bullets that you just said, all little buckets, we didn't fund that, right? None of that, right? Okay. Thank you. Because, I mean, I know ISU had a program, and they had to roll their dollars into it. I know University of Southern Indiana asked for a mere $250,000. They have a program to bring in minority students, and that was not funded. So I guess the word qualified means a lot in the General Assembly right now when it comes to higher ed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sorry I had to miss part of your presentation, but I had a question because your increase is so much more significant than some of the others in terms of, and you are a two-year institution, but the report from the higher ed, which talked about the average loan balance for students, your debt is more than half of what a typical four-year student here is in Indiana. And so I don't understand how when your costs are lower, as you shared in your letter, how can that be that their debt is so significant? It's 2/3 of what a four-year student is acquiring, and you are a two-year institution. And I assume that includes not a typical associate's degree type of student who is now then matriculating onto a four-year college, but it's anybody in your program who's been there for 2 years. Is that right?
Yes. And Pell is about $2,000 more than our tuition and fees, and that's refunded to students, but it would be different for every student, but some of those students are using loans for living expenses, so it's not just a direct correlation with the cost of Ivy Tech and that loan balance of $10,000 plus.
So you're saying that a four-year student doesn't use some of their loan for living?
They certainly could, yes.
Pardon me?
Yes, they could.
Right. So, I mean, you have certificate programs and things like that don't, and you charge the same fees as well, as I spoke to. So how do you explain that's a huge amount of debt for someone coming out of a two-year program where they may be receiving a certificate to be a welder, CNA, or something like that?
I can look into that. I'm not sure exactly on the number. Just over 10,000 is the number you have, correct?
No, the report has that the graduates at Indiana's public two-year institutions, and that'd be you mostly, accumulate an average of $17,000 in student loans, while 2/3 of our students of four-year have 26,000, 27.
I believe our number is closer to 10. I can check on that for you, but I think that would just be VU and us in that number.
Okay, but do you track then the loans that the students are carrying compared to what type of program? Because some of them could only be there for half a year. Do you track that as well?
We do, and I thought we sent reports over the number was 10,800, I believe.
Okay, all right.
So
well, you can get
I'll
that.
check for you, though.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Mr. Rath, Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, our tuition increase was 2.9. That's our recommendation. You look at all these stats and all the things that go on. One of the things that we do at BU is just what you do up here. We have to sit down and see where we stand and how we can operate our school. In a reply to Senator Brown, if you go to a two-year institution and you come out of there and you don't have your debt paid off in 7 years, that's the student's responsibility. I don't know what they're doing, but it has nothing to do with the institution itself. And on our CTE side of the house, the average return on investment is about 7 years. And these students are making over $60,000 a year. So students have a tendency to draw down on this Pell money, the loan money, and all the other free things that go with it. But well, that's the decision they make that we can't do anything about it. So I think from that standpoint, we may take too much of a bruising. They changed their majors 3 times. What are you going to do about that? So until they finally limit out on the Fed side of the house, then there's not much we can do. But from our institutional standpoint, 38% of our operation is fees, and the other half is state contribution. And so we have such a low fee base. And so we're driving as hard as we can to provide this education. And I think one of the most important things that needs to be pointed out, that CTE education is probably the most expensive education you can provide in a state other than medical school. You know, your faculty to student ratio, 1-to-1, 1-to-3, you know, not 24 sitting in a classroom. High expense equipment, high tech. Those are all the things that we're doing. We're pushing stuff out across the state. People are demanding more and more of us all the time, and we're in all these different places. And so I think the whole thing needs to be looked at. I don't think we fit in this metrics model. And so I think for what we're doing, 2.9 is not enough. If we want to keep our industry whole and where we need to go, or we need to have a combination of funding sources that keep the rate that we're all comfortable with. But last year, no raises for our faculty. Year before that, a one-time payment. So anybody here will tell you the last thing we hate to do is not give our faculty raises. So you know we're at the limit when we do that. And so I feel we've done a good job. I think we're pushing the state's agenda across the state. CCE's where it needs to be, but I was disappointed in the cuts in distance education. It was $250,000 doesn't sound like much, but when you're pushing on the edge, we're still moving forward and making commitments. So, good example, we're going into East Allen. That commitment was made last year, and so that means that we've got to live up to our end of the obligation. So those are the kind of things that I think we need to have discussed before we change funding going across, you know, from 50 to 40, and then make it retroactive from the day we started. That was a pretty big blow. So other than that, I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Phil, where do you think that Vincent stands on the performance funding formula. Do you feel that you get shortchanged on one aspect or another?
Well, this year we did well. The next budget session, as we're looking out, with enrollment and drops in enrollment, I think it's going to hurt us. There's only so far you can move it. But one of the things I think absolutely needs to be changed is taking our base appropriation and throwing it into a pot. So, you start off in a hole, let's say you're 6%, and we all have to, earn 6% on the metrics, our appropriation base is cut. Well, that's just not going to happen, depending on how and where you're at. And so one of my concerns are if we stay on this course and we believe it works, which I don't, there'll be a time when the state, again, will have some bad years. And what are they going to do? Universities throw 10% of your appropriation, 12%? I don't see it as a long-term solution.
Bill, thank you. Have you contracted your footprint? Are you contracted your facilities?
No, actually, we're in more footprint today than we've ever been because we're in the CTE early college. We're not responsible for the facilities because we're partnering with K-12, which is a great place to be.
So your number of employees has grown?
No, actually, the number of employees have been stable. And the reason for that is, if we go into a K-12 CTE site, then we're utilizing their faculty, we're training them to our standards, and then we're able to offer that first year of their CTE education in the high school. Saves them thousands of dollars, and there's no additional faculty costs. We're just taking those faculty and saying, you're going to teach something different, and this is what it's going to be. Just from maintenance, machining, so.
And your enrollment, you said, this year went down, or has it been going down?
It has been going down, yes.
Uh-huh. Are you increasing your enrollment outside of the state of Indiana?
It has gone up. We've got a few big things going on right now that I can't really talk about, but we're actually getting a lot of demand from outside the state of Indiana from corporations wanting to do our model. So John Deere's an example. They hire the kids, they're employed, they send them to our campus for 6 weeks, we send them back, they work for 6 weeks, then they bring them back, and in 3 years they have their associate's degree, and then they have no debt. And they're making money while they're doing this. That's where Indiana needs to go. I truly believe if we spend less time looking at all these other states, the model, the CTE model, is the way to go. It's a winner. And we've got all the resources to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We submitted a report. We have hard copies if anyone needs one. And I thought I'd speak for a few minutes and then take questions. Indiana University's focus in developing our biennial budget can be characterized in two areas: financial stability and affordability. In terms of financial stability, over the past year, we asked all of our campuses to develop detailed two-year budgets. The key revenue drivers for the budgets were enrollment, tuition increases, and appropriations. The variable that caused the greatest concern in our modeling was enrollment, as national and regional enrollment trends and forecasts are not favorable. Some of the data that impacted our projections were the fact that we were seeing declining resident enrollments in Indiana. In the past 5-year period, resident enrollments at four-year public institutions have declined by 5.8%, and resident enrollments at two-year public institutions have declined by 34%. Projections on national trends indicate that high school graduates attending college will continue to drop significantly through 2029, with the Midwest and the Northeast seeing the biggest declines. In addition, international enrollments nationally and at IU have dropped significantly in the last few years. Even with these trends, IU remains committed to educating Indiana students, accepting over 75% of all applicants and being the state leader in both enrolling and degree attainment of Indiana residents. Our financial model using the Commission's guideline increase of 1.65% for tuition and fees generated budget deficits. We were not able to achieve a balanced budget without higher fees, tuition and fees. The balanced budget includes continuing investments to provide resources for financial aid, advising and counseling, research support, and new degree programs to meet state workforce and student employment needs. IU is continuing to innovate and invest in new education programs through residential, online, and blended paths to serve students. Between 2011 and 2016, IU accounted for 57% of all the degrees approved by the Commissioner of Higher Education for four-year public institutions. The natural question is, what about the cost side of the equation? As you know, higher education has high fixed costs, mostly people. The Higher Education Inflation Index, HEPI, is weighted heavily towards compensation and has risen on average by 2.6% the past 5 years. At IU, 65% of our costs relate to salary and benefits. In terms of cost management, IU operates under the Responsibility Center Management Model, also known as RCM. In RCM, schools receive revenues for the credit hours they teach, providing them the budget they need to operate. If they teach fewer credit hours, they receive fewer funds, and they have to reduce their expenses accordingly. The RCM model requires units to align their programs to market-based realities, creates accountability, and forces units to limit their expenses to the revenues they generate. On a macro level, while IU has 7 main campuses and 9 medical education centers spread throughout the state, we have worked to consolidate a set of shared services to be efficient and to support all IU campuses. This includes shared student services like financial aid, billing and collections, and student records, to administrative functions like purchasing, information technology, and facilities planning. By centralizing and sharing services, IU has been able to reduce the number of personnel needed to provide these services at each individual campus. One measure of our efficiency is a comparison of our operating costs per student. The results of our effort to centralize services and continuously improve operations have already made IU's operating cost per student the lowest among all Big Ten institutions and all AAA-rated institutions. And I'd like to speak to affordability. To achieve its mission, IU must appropriately balance increase in tuition while remaining affordable to students. The IU campuses provide a range of pricing options to meet the needs of Indiana residents. IU Bloomington's price is $4,000 to $5,000 below many Big Ten peers and also below the national average for doctoral institutions. IU's regional campuses offer a 4-year public education at the lowest price in the state of Indiana and are over $1,000 below the national average for public master's degree granting institutions. Further enhancing affordability is our commitment to offering competitive financial aid packages that reduce the total cost of attendance for students attending IU. Over the past 3 years, the total net cost of attendance at all of our campuses has actually dropped by 10% or more. IU and Purdue are the only 2 institutions in the Big Ten with a total net cost of attendance below $12,000. All others are $14,000 or higher. Financial aid has been and will continue to be a priority for the university. Affordability is also tied to on-time graduation. The sooner we help our students graduate, the less they will pay, and the sooner they will enter the workforce, benefiting both the state and generating personal income. Due to programs like banded tuition, new systems for tracking academic progress, increases in the number of counselors, and targeted aid to facilitate summer study and persistence, IU has improved the 4-year graduation rate on all of its campuses by over 10% over the past 5 years. The combination of additional aid and enhanced 4-year graduation rates also results in students graduating with less debt. Over the past 6 years, the debt incurred by Indiana residents has been reduced by over $100 million, or 31%. A report released last month by the U.S. Financial Literacy Education Commission cited IU's leadership in financial literacy, counseling, and issuing debt letters to students summarizing what they have borrowed to date and what they expect to pay after graduation. The concept of a debt letter led to new legislation in Indiana and 11 other states, which now require institutions to provide students with debt letters. In closing, IU believes in and supports the Commission of Higher Education and the state's desire that an IU education remain affordable to Indiana resident undergraduate students. Through financial aid, increased advising, enhanced four-year graduation rates, IU is helping to achieve this objective while still investing in core academic programs and research that benefits the state's economy. IU Bloomington has been within the Commission's guidance since 2014. In fiscal 2016 and 2017, IU Bloomington froze tuition and mandatory fees. Even with a 2.5% increase for this biennium, IU Bloomington's resident undergraduate tuition remains below the guideline amount over the last 3 biennium. With that, I'm happy to take questions.
John, the Ivy Tech said that 55% of their revenue comes from the state. What percentage of your revenue comes from the state?
About 17%.
Thank you. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you mentioned the program that your graduation rate has been 10% higher since the 2006 entering class, which is great, but you mentioned some of the reasons why, the summer programs and things like that. So do you calculate what the cost is for those students who you obviously probably have labeled most at risk in order to get them to graduate? And I assume the graduation rate is at 4 years? Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So what's the cost per them? Because obviously that's, I'm going to assume, a higher cost per student.
Yeah. The cost to get them through in 4 years?
Those students that you mentioned with the summer programs and those things.
The total cost I don't have. I would have to look into that.
Okay. And then did you, when you have the fixed costs, healthcare, pension, salaries, can you give me an idea of what your administrative staff per student ratio is now, what it was 10 years ago? And have you increased salaries in the last few years for faculty and or administrators?
Yeah. In terms of the ratio, I'd have to look at that. I don't have that off the top of my head. In terms of salary increases, this year, the budget we just put together has averaged 1.7% across the board. And then it will depend on campuses. Some of our campuses in the last few years have been able to do 1 or 0. We try to target 2%, but they're not always able to do that in terms of the staff.
You try to give a 2% raise every year?
If they can afford it, if we can afford it. So what you'll see is, under the RCM model, which is responsibility centered, the units that have the funds may be able to do it, but you'll have, even within Bloomington, you'll have departments that can't afford it. They maybe only can give 1%, some will give 0, and so on. So it'll depend on what the RCM is doing, or what the responsibility center is doing.
Okay, because in your report, you talk about, or maybe it was another one, our wage rate has not gone up, obviously, as significantly as national wage rates. And of course, the heat of the recession, it was negative, and yet you try to maintain this 2% regardless?
No, it will be, it's a target.
Right, but that's your target regardless.
But if we can get the campus, and I think part of the issue is if we fall too far behind in wages in certain disciplines, we're having a hard time then competing for employees and faculty and so on.
Right, I mean, just as a K-12, there are certain majors probably where you have a harder time recruiting in a certain specialty. I understand that. And then finally, your operating expenses per student. So when the chart that you show, $37,000 per student, is that just at the Bloomington campus? And could you don't have to tell me now, but you can break that down, what exactly is included? I assume it's room and board and things like that?
That's all the campuses, because it's based on Moody's information where they rate the university and they rate the entire university. In terms of what's in the expenses, I have a breakdown of what they include. It's instructional, it's everything. It's the entire operating expense base of the university. So, but I can get that for you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. A couple of things. You said, I want to get this right, that the Your tuition accounts for about 73%, and the performance, the state money is 17. Is that, did I hear that right?
Tuition is, yes, on the appropriation. Tuition is probably, of total revenues, 36 or 37%. We have a lot of research at the university. We have a lot of other auxiliaries is outside of that, which is hundreds of millions of dollars and so on. I can get you a breakdown if you like it.
All right, well, that's what I'm trying to figure out is where, where is IU on the performance funding schedule in terms of, I know that one of the things that they look at is change. How much better have you gotten from the last year? And if you're already at the top, then it's hard to do that. Where are your dingers on the performance funding that you get?
I think the performance funding formula hurts the Bloomington campus because it's a high-performing campus and it's hard to make the incremental change. And so, as my previous person up here mentioned, taking 6% away in terms of the performance funding formula, it's taking away from the Bloomingtons and the West Lafayette's and then redistributing to the other campuses. And so that's hard for a high-performing campus. I think it's also, it's great that the state or the commission looks at the performance funding model, and I think, looking at that again is important, looking at what the demographics are going to be going forward. If enrollments continue to decline, how are you going to improve on 3 years versus 3 years, and in terms of a declining enrollment? So, but right now, our probably the place where we get hit the most is in the high-performing campus at Bloomington. At Bloomington.
Thank you. What's enrollment at Bloomington done?
It's been over 5 years, it's up 2 to 3%, but it actually was down this year 1%.
Have you contracted your staff any?
Yes, it depends. Again, it's based on RCM. So take, for example, the college, which is arts and sciences, over 10,000 students. They've actually reduced over 60 faculty members the last couple of years to adjust. So depending on which department and so on, people are adjusting. If you look at our regionals, which are seeing the largest enrollment decline, they've reduced over 130 staff members in the last few years. So yes, it's happening in
Have you gotten rid of some majors that aren't useful anymore?
I don't know if whether they've been eliminated. Obviously in terms of reducing faculty, but I don't know if an actual major. I'd have to look to see what's been eliminated.
But isn't that going to long-term how you look at programming, is you're going to have to look at what majors you have?
Yes, and we're looking at and developing new majors for what students need going forward. As I mentioned, we have a lot of new programs approved. Consolidation of schools, where you see the media school, which eliminated journalism and brought that into the media school. We saw travel and recreational sciences has now been eliminated and brought in. So there's restructurings going on in that regard.
About a decade ago, tuition was 10% of Hoosiers' income. Now it's closer to 15. How do we get back to 10%? You keep saying how you compare to other surrounding institutions, but I don't care about that. I care about what Hoosiers can afford.
Yeah, and I think that's where my pointing out the net tuition price is really important on that and how much aid we give. I think, it's a two-sided equation. Incomes have to rise as well, and I think
incomes have risen faster than inflation.
Yeah, well, I think, our role is to graduate more people, more Hoosiers, so that we can generate the income for the state. So it's a balance.
Okay.
And one more question, and this is a little bit probably broader for all of them. Do you look at, as you are looking at more students, it seems to me, that are requiring financial need and the support that you give, which is great, but are you looking at the mix to see long-term how that profile is affected? In other words, as you are supplementing the students with the greatest need, and/or maybe the greatest need to need assistance in terms of actually getting a 4 degree, and at the same time, those in the middle who are bringing their own financial aid to the table, so they're able to pay for school, but that's more on them. My concern is with the debt load that students are acquiring, and ours is not as bad as other places, I get that, but that we're not contemplating that student's debt load in the mix that they have. So the fact that you mentioned in your report how many students their need is met and how many take care of, but then are you pushing that off so that more students are in fact having to go out and acquire more debt outside of what you're able? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we're really concerned about the debt aspects of it. We have a target where we want to keep a student with graduating debt, that the debt load is less than 10% of their income going forward, and I think we're succeeding at that. The various RAP programs we do and trying to get, one of the things is the 4-year graduation rate, and now we're seeing a lot of students graduate in 3.5. That's very important too, because that reduces the debt load. I think part of the discussion earlier was being careful that we take students in or prepare them to retain and go through from 1 year to 2 years, because you don't want to see them 1 year or 2 year in drop out with debt. So all those things we're looking
Yeah,
at.
but so that's the problem, is we push dual credit, which is great, because then kids are actually maybe more likely to graduate in 3 years or 3.5. But your graduation rates really are 4 and 5 and 6 years out. So that was the problem. They've stretched their time at school out, they've stretched the amount of debt that they've acquired. But the flip side is them graduating faster is good for them, good for the state, good for the economy, but not so good for you. I mean, as enrollment is dipping, you're having them there paying less. So are you starting to calculate that
Yes.
model? Because if we're really, really good at dual credit, which I hope we will continue to be, that's going to impact your bottom line as well.
Yes, and it's a great point. It's actually interesting because we've talked a lot about that, and we're doing a lot right now with enrollment management. But if you think about it, last year we had the largest freshman class ever, and all our graduation rates are up 10%. So we graduate 21,000 students. So that means over 2,000 students left early, which we want. But yes, it impacts the bottom line.
Thank you, Chairman Mishler, members of the committee. Aaron Trump, University of Southern Indiana. USI's total undergraduate tuition rate and mandatory fees will increase by 2% for 2019-2020 and 2% for 2020-2021. When comparing this annual cost of tuition and fees for full-time students from the 2018-2019 year, this increase will represent a total annual increase of cost of tuition to our students of $156.90 in year one, and in the 2020 academic year, this will be $159.90. After these increases, USI will continue to offer 4-year degree programs at a rate below the state and national average for 4-year degrees at public institutions, and will remain one of the most affordable degree granting institutions in the state of Indiana. USI has always recognized that cost can be a barrier to access for our students, and is committed to providing affordable quality to Indiana residents. The recommendation of the trustees by USI's administration was not made without some serious considerations, which included the Commission's recommendation, USI's operating budget and expenditures for the upcoming biennium, USI's operating appropriation from the state, various economic and inflation indicators from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, cost of attendance comparison to USI's regional peer institutions, as we were talking about just currently with Senator Brown, dual credit acquisition by incoming students, overall credit hour enrollment, and on-time and early graduation rates, and USI's history of maintaining an affordable tuition fee structure. This will be our lowest percentage tuition increase in over a decade. Further, this lower percentage increase is a relatively low actual dollar amount increase to our students. But in mentioning this, I think it's also important to address that these past increases were discussed in depth with both past members of this committee and the Commission for Higher Education. USI found itself in a position where we had improved dramatically in the quality of our academic programs and the caliber of students we were attracting, but we're still offering a tuition rate that was dramatically lower than our peer institutions and producing a revenue amount that was too low to support our growing functions. This increased model was also endorsed by former Senator Kenley in this committee. USI has not reached this decision to raise tuition without continuing to implement cost reduction and containment measures. Following the trustees' June 4th meeting when tuition was set, President Rashan issued a memorandum to all university staff and faculty announcing there will be no salary increases in the upcoming fiscal year. In taking this step, USI is further attempting to demonstrate its willingness to make necessary sacrifices and its commitment to maintaining affordable tuition and fee rates for its students. But this step was taken while recognizing the possible negative impact on USI's ability to both attract and retain quality professionals in the current highly competitive employment climate. I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have. Yes, sir.
Just one real quick. What's the percentage of your total revenue does the state?
Right now, our total state appropriation percentage is 49.8% of our budget, and tuition and fees is 44.3%. Other income amounts to 5.9%. And as you may be able to gather quickly, compared to IU,
So say that again, 49.8?
49.8% in 2018-2019 is a state appropriation, and 44.3% is student fees, 5.9% is other income. And as you could compare to IU's numbers that were just stated, we are a relatively young institution. We are not a research institution, at least not a true research institution that can leverage our size and large grant opportunities. We can't leverage a large endowment partly because of our age as well. And so we are much more reliant on state appropriation. And in that percentage has gone down over time, we've become more reliant on student fees and have tried to maintain those at appropriate levels while continuing to offer better quality over time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Historically, what I've been around for a few months or so, lower level in regards to Southern Indiana, University of Southern Indiana has been lower than most of our other institutions. And then I think at one point there was like a equity adjustment for that. Because of the lack of the equity adjustment, I know you said 49%. Is that, excuse me, contribute to your rate increase?
Yes, that's definitely a part of it. I think if, and it's not, I don't want to say this in a way to complain. I think we're very happy and appreciative of any appropriation we can get to continue our functions. But based on our overall budget and where we stand, small amounts to USI amount to a lot as far as what we can do and what we can accomplish. And a small increase in our appropriation would be passed on to student savings. This amount that we set is directly related to where our operating budget is, where we have obligations going in the next 2 years. As I said, roughly 78% of our operating budget is human capital. It's paying salaries. And so when we freeze our salaries, that's going to directly affect what our operating budget is, and it's a huge step we can take to maintain our operating budget level. But if we had, slight increases in appropriation, we would pass those savings on to our students.
One more question. And I know the Budget Committee did tour institution this past summer, fall, and I know we talking about the OT and PT programs were at capacity and had a waiting list. Mm-hmm. And talking to the president, we're looking at $250,000 to have a program like IU and other schools had to bring more students in. And in light of that, it did not happen. So I think what you guys as an institution has been bestowed upon you, I think you've done really well with that. And I just hope that we continue to bring more students outside the state that want to come from Kentucky and Tennessee and Ohio that want to come into the PT and OT programs. And I think we're missing a big opportunity there in regards to making that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. Thank you. It's great to be back. Am I the last person that's keeping everybody from getting lunch? Okay, I'll keep that in mind. I want to thank you, Chairman Mishler and members of the committee. Greg Good from Indiana State, proud alum of Indiana State, and on behalf of President Deborah Curtis and the ISU family, I want to first and foremost say thank you. Thanks to each and every one of you, Republicans and Democrats, fiscal staff, all the hard work that went into this budget. We're very, very grateful for the support from the state of Indiana. We also want to thank Governor Holcomb, the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. I'm biased, but I truly believe that we have in this state the absolute best Commissioner for Higher Education in the United States of America. That's the reason why a lot of states pay close attention to higher education policy that's driven from this state. And I also want to say thanks to Alicia and the team from the Commission. Indiana State takes student success very seriously, and for the first time since Indiana adopted the performance funding formula, ISU was successful in meeting all metrics, all driven around completion and student success. And we do that, and we were able to do that this year by our commitment to our core mission, serving predominantly individuals who are our fellow citizens, who come from Indiana and they want to stay in Indiana. Over 76% of our students come from within Indiana. Over 75% of those who graduate remain in this state, many of whom go back to their communities as leaders. And we're really proud of some recent data that we recently released. 94% of last year's graduates from Indiana State University either A, found a job in their intended field, B, they're pursuing their plan, which was from the beginning to go on to graduate school, or 3, they're serving the United States of America in our armed forces. We also maintain a disciplined commitment to fiscal responsibility and affordability. We want to highlight that of the 4-year comprehensive universities that serve a statewide mission, and by this I want to include IU and Purdue, Ball State, Indiana State, ISU continues its multi-decade commitment to being the most affordable option. And so, in keeping with our commitment to affordability, this last Friday, the ISU Board of Trustees set tuition with a modest increase of 1.61% for fall of 2019 and 1.62% for fall of 2020, slightly under the target recommendation of the Commission for Higher Education. We couldn't have done it without the state support, and again, we say thank you. I'm also here to report that the Board of Trustees approved the implementation of a new and robust and compassionate initiative to dramatically increase student access to mental health counseling services at ISU while promoting student wellness and helping to overcome the stigma that has for far too long plagued mental health and wellness. To jumpstart this initiative, the university will implement a $40 fee in 2020. And this is very important. I'd like to take a couple of minutes just to walk you through how we got to this point. You've all met President Curtis. She's about 1.5 years into her tenure as president of Indiana State. She's a first-generation college student herself. She's an alumna of Indiana State and a former K-12 educator. She's made it a key priority to engage with our students and the families of our students, to hear from them their hopes, their dreams, their concerns. One clear and resounding message that she has heard is that Indiana State can and must do a better job of providing mental health counseling on our campus. The university has for many years maintained a counseling center. When I was a junior, I accessed the counseling center when I was had lost my grandmother and was very close to her. And while I was making straight A's at Indiana State, I was considering just dropping out for a semester, which many of us know all it takes is for a student to drop out for one semester and we could lose him or her. So we've had a long time commitment to providing counseling. And, but like any mental health service providers across the country, the demand has grown substantially, and our own counseling center can't keep up with the demand. And with any college experience, we think about our own experiences in college. Even the best experience comes times of immense stress. And it's not a surprise that our sister institutions, IU, Purdue, and Ball State, already have implemented fees for counseling services. I would note that their fees are higher than what we are proposing here. Stress, grief, fear, homesickness, worries about short-term and long-term futures, addictions, all of which are augmented by social media. These are things that human beings deal with, things that are part of everyday life. We read about issues that fall under the mental health umbrella in newspapers and in every community of the state. Certainly everyone's district is impacted. Our colleagues out in the hallways of the State House who advocate for community mental health services remind us every day that every American has some connection with mental health needs, whether it's personally or knows of a friend or loved one in need of such services. Our students are no different. And in fact, when you think about the students that we serve at Indiana State University, taking a look at just this past year's freshman class alone, 50% first-generation college students, 51% who are Pell eligible, a little over 20% 21st century scholars, 35% from minority communities. These are demographics that no other university in the state of Indiana serving the statewide mission are serving, and if we want to be true to our commitment to continued student success, we believe that the issue should be addressed. Finally, I'll just say this for what it's worth. The student body at ISU held a campus-wide referendum asking the board to consider a $75 fee. They wanted to pay more. It passed overwhelmingly by a large margin. My colleague, Diane McKee, who couldn't be here today because of a family commitment outside of the state of Indiana, I think you all know her, of a person to be of tremendous integrity and fiscal responsibility. She and her team did their own analysis, and we believe that we can meet the needs of our students, increase services, all while maintaining our commitment to affordability at $40. And so again, one last time, I want to say thank you to this body and to the state of Indiana for your support for public higher education. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Question. Thank you for your presentation. I know we had talked about your summer bridge program. What was that funded or not funded, or are you still doing the summer bridge program?
We do, Representative Porter, and it's a big step for us to help transition individuals who just graduated from high school and are coming to Indiana State, many of whom are first-generation college students, getting them in the mindset, many of which are just making sure that you've got making those lifestyle choices, good decisions, and making sure that you're gearing up for the rigors of college life. And that's a great example of the student success special appropriation that we received 2 years ago that was rolled into our operating budget. It was an agreement made by the Commission for Higher Education in Indiana State. So those services are still being funded. It's just that line item appropriation was actually rolled into our operating base budget.
So did did that have an impact in your operating budget, or were there more dollars given toward the summer bridge program, or were you told to make do with what you have?
The commitment remains the same, both from the standpoint of the state dollars as well as Indiana State's commitment to making sure that those programs continue.
Good answer, Greg. I know you're 3.0, so you did very well on that one.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg, could you break down the other universities with it?
I'll go one step further than that.
Okay.
In 2009, 58% of ISU's total budget came from the state of Indiana. In 2009, 58%. 2019, it's about 40%.
And then the other sources, student tuition?
Yeah. And that's by no way a complaint. Many years ago, I remember then Chairman Espic used to give Indiana State kind of a hard time for being the highest appropriation per FTE. Our enrollment was hovering around 10,000, and we were getting a much higher appropriation. Today we are hovering around 13,000 and operating with less state appropriation. But again, we are the lowest tuition for those of the institutions serving the statewide mission.
Okay, what percentage of is, like everybody broke this down by state of Indiana, student fees, and then other auxiliaries. What would you say your student fees are?
That fund the university?
Yeah.
That's a little over 51%.
Okay. And then auxiliary would be the other 9. Okay.
The other thing I would point out, and again, Indiana is so blessed to have different institutions of higher education serving different missions. Indiana State doesn't have the endowments that some of our sister institutions have. President Curtis is working her heart out to grow that, and it's very, very important because that helps fund institutional financial aid. But we're just not quite there yet.
Senator Taylor, before you asked your question, I actually wrote down a note here to talk to CHE about doing a report. If there was a way to do a report on a breakdown of the percentage of state dollars versus tuition fees, et cetera, even a breakdown on percentage state tuition on undergrad versus grad students. So I made myself a note here of something I'd like to talk to CHE about, because we're all having the same questions, I think. And it'd be nice for a breakdown of all that from all the universities. So
I every year, and then to see what the changes are. But that's your prerogative, Mr. Chairman, but thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Well, before we elect a new chair, I just want to say this is David's final meeting. His 9 years here in the Senate, and then his years at the mayor's office, budget agency. I think after Senator Kinley left, he decided I was too high in maintenance, and he decided to retire. So, no, I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you, David, and I just want to thank him for all of his years of service to our state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck. I'm ready for you.
May I?
You may.
It's based upon the part of the agenda. It's my pleasure to nominate Representative Brown for the chairmanship role of the Budget Committee for the next biennium, but let's make that effective upon adjournment of today's meeting.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that motion. I'd like to second that motion in regards to making Dr. Representative Brown chairman of this August committee. My name is Gregory Porter. Thank you.
Can we take that by consent? You want to vote? Jeez. All right. So upon adjournment, today's Representative Brown will be the chair. It's been an honor to chair. I kind of was thrown in a whirlwind when Senator Kinley retired, and then actually got hurt even before his last scheduled meeting, so I actually came in early. So it's been quite an educational experience for me, and I appreciate everybody's patience and willingness to work with me, and look forward to supporting Representative Brown. So, thank you. Any other discussion? Anything you'd like to say?
No, thank you. Thank you.
All right, with that said, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Oh, I might want to mention, that's probably an important part I probably should have mentioned, is the next meeting will be July 18th and 19th in Bloomington. So.
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for your leadership over the last 2 or 3 years. It's been fun. It's been a learning experience for all of us. But I know learning curve is pretty tough here when they come and deal with a $34 billion budget. And I want to thank you for your leadership over the last 2 or 3 years. Thank you.
Yes, I wanted to echo that. Thank you. We came in at the, well, you came in, I think maybe a year before me, but this was a learning experience for me, being on the committee, serving under you and Senator Kinley. And just from my standpoint, I think you took on some new issues that I think are going to be important going down the road. And I want to personally thank you for allowing me to have a platform to talk about the MWB program that the state has. And I think it's because of my discussions with you and Representative Porter that we now have the universities really looking into this and looking into that program. So that's going to affect a lot of small businesses, and I wanted to thank you personally for that.